Darling, that straight hair screams, trying too hard. And your southern drawl? So? Quaint, Genevieve sneered, her diamond bracelet glinting under the rooftop chandelier. Beckett shifted uncomfortably, muttering, Mom, ease up, but his eyes stayed fixed on his plate, silent as the city skyline beyond. Ayana sat poised at the polished mahogany table in this glittering New York eatery, her bodycon dress hugging her curves like a second skin, every inch the vision of grace amid the opulence. Yet the barbs flew unchecked, her sleek locks deemed gaudy, her southern twang provincial, her black heritage dismissed as unfitting for their gilded world. No one intervened, not even her billionaire husband. She swallowed the humiliation, fork trembling in her manicured hand. Then, with a breath that steadied the storm inside, Ayana rose. Enough! The word hung like thunder. Forks froze midair. Wine glasses halted at lips. The table fell utterly silent. No clink of silverware, no whispers of disdain. In that hush, she reclaimed her power, unraveling their world forever. What secrets did her voice unearth? Would Beckett finally choose her over legacy? Stay. The fallout will grip you. The hum of Manhattan's evening pulse faded as Ayana pushed through the heavy glass doors of the gallery on West 57th Street. It was one of those crisp autumn nights where the city air bit just enough to sharpen the senses, carrying whispers of fallen leaves and distant taxi horns. At 32, Ayana had learned to savor these stolen moments. Away from the relentless rhythm of her days, mentoring at-risk Black youth in Brooklyn, where every success story felt like a hard-won victory against the grind. Tonight, though, she sought solace in art, a sanctuary where her soul could breathe without apology. Her long, straight hair cascaded like a silken veil down her back, catching the soft glow of recessed lights as she stepped into the main hall. She wore a simple black sheath dress that skimmed her curves with quiet elegance, heels clicking softly against the polished concrete floor. Ayana paused, heart quickening, as her eyes locked onto the centerpiece, an abstract masterpiece by Ebony Hale, a rising Black artist whose work pulsed with the raw fury and fragile hope of ancestral memory. Swirls of deep indigo and fiery ochre bled into one another on the canvas, evoking the Mississippi Delta floods that had swallowed her great-grandmother's dreams, stories her mother had whispered like sacred incantations during humid southern summers. A lump rose in Ayana's throat, unbidden. She wasn't one for public tears, but here in this sterile space of wealth and whispers, the painting stripped her bare. It wasn't just color and form. It was a mirror to the quiet rage she carried, the kind that simmered when funding for her nonprofit dried up, or when donors patted her on the back with condescension masked as praise. You're doing God's work, they'd say, their eyes glazing over her passion as if it were a quaint hobby. Ayana reached out, fingers hovering inches from the frame, tracing the invisible lines of resilience. In that touch, she felt seen, truly seen, for the first time that week. Her chest tightened with a bittersweet ache, a reminder that beauty often bloomed from the cracks of pain. She didn't notice him at first. Beckett Harrington stood a few feet away, his broad shoulders cutting a sharp silhouette against the canvas's chaos. At 35, he was the unassuming king of a tech empire built on algorithms that predicted human desires before they formed. Software that powered everything from stock trades to personalized playlists for the elite. Tonight, he sought escape too, fleeing boardroom battles where every decision weighed like lead. Dressed in a tailored navy suit that hugged his athletic frame, his dark hair tousled just enough to hint at rebellion, Beckett stared at the painting with an intensity that bordered on hunger. His jaw clenched subtly, green eyes narrowing as if decoding a cipher only he could see. Ayana stepped closer, drawn by the shared silence, her breath catching when their gazes collided. There was no polite nod, no awkward gallery small talk. Instead, a spark, electric, uninvited, crackled between them. Beckett's lips curved into a half smile, tentative yet warm, like sunlight piercing storm clouds. "It's alive, isn't it?" he said, his voice low and resonant, carrying the faint clip of a Boston upbringing polished by Ivy League halls. "Like it's screaming secrets we weren't meant to hear." Ayana's pulse stuttered. Strangers didn't speak to her like this. not with that raw edge of vulnerability. Most men in these circles size her up like a curiosity, their compliments laced with the sting of otherness. But this one, his words wrapped around her like a shared confession, pulling at the threads of her guarded heart. She tilted her head, studying him, her full lips parting in a cautious smile, screaming yes, but not just secrets, demands. Hails pulling from the bones of the South, the ones buried under levees and lies. It's not polite art, it's a reckoning. Beckett's eyes lit with something fierce, a flicker of recognition that made Ayana's skin prickle. He leaned in slightly, the scent of his cologne, cedar and subtle citrus, mingling with the gallery's faint aroma of varnish and ambition. A reckoning, he echoed, tasting the word. I see it now. The ochre, it's blood and earth, isn't it? Not chaos, but creation from the wreckage. His admission hung there, vulnerable, as if he'd just handed her a piece of his armored soul. Ayana felt a warmth bloom in her chest, chasing away the evening's chill. For the first time in months, conversation felt like dancing, fluid, alive, without the weight of expectation. They lingered by the painting for what felt like hours, though the wall clock mocked mere minutes. Ayana spoke of her mother's tales from rural Georgia, the way floodwaters had reshaped not just land but legacies, forcing her family to rebuild with grit and grace. Her voice, laced with that soft southern lilt she sometimes softened in professional settings, flowed freely here, unguarded. Beckett listened, not with the distracted nod of obligation, but with rapt attention, his questions probing deeper. What did resilience taste like in those stories? How did it fuel her work with the kids she mentored? Ayana's laughter bubbled up unexpectedly when he confessed his own reckoning, a privileged childhood that left him chasing authenticity in boardrooms full of echoes. You're not what I expected in a place like this, Beckett said finally, his tone laced with genuine wonder, not judgment. Ayana's heart skipped, a mix of delight and wariness flooding her veins. Expected? The words stung faintly, evoking board meetings where her ideas were innovative but never quite viable. Yet in his eyes there was no pity, only curiosity, a mirror reflecting her fire back at her. And you're not the suit I pegged for Hale's fan, she countered, her dark eyes sparkling with challenge. Most tech kings stick to Picassos and safe abstracts. He chuckled, a deep rumbling sound that vibrated through her. Guilty, but safe's a cage. This, he gestured to the canvas. This breaks the bars. The air between them thickened, charged with possibility. Ayana's mind raced. Part of her screamed caution, whispering of the chasms that yawn between worlds like theirs. She knew the stories. Brilliant women like her, drawn to men of means, only to drown in the undertow of unspoken hierarchies. But another part, the one Hale's painting had awakened, yearned to leap. As the gallery's closing announcement murmured through hidden speakers, Beckett straightened, reluctance etching his features. There's a cafe around the corner. Nothing fancy, just strong coffee and quieter corners. Care to continue the reckoning? His invitation was a bridge extended over that invisible divide, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch. Ayana hesitated, fingers twisting the strap of her clutch. The spark was real, a flame licking at the edges of her carefully constructed walls. What if it burned too bright, too fast? What if it illuminated truths she wasn't ready to face? Yet the ache of loneliness, that quiet companion in her ambitious solitude, urged her forward. Lead the way, she said, her voice steady despite the butterflies rioting in her stomach. They stepped out into the night, the city's neon heartbeat syncing with Ayana's own. Over steaming mugs in a dimly lit cafe, words tumbled like confessions. Her dreams of expanding her mentorship program to bridge urban divides. His quiet battles against the isolation of wealth that turned friends into transactions. Laughter came easy, weaving through the steam. His boyish grin when she teased his algorithmic approach to life. Her unguarded joy at his earnest questions about her roots. By the time they parted under a street lamp's golden pool, numbers exchanged with a promise of tomorrow's secrets, Ayana's heart thrummed with a dangerous hope. Walking home, the cool air kissing her flushed cheeks, She replayed the evening like a cherished reel. The spark had ignited something profound, a connection that felt like home, yet shadowed by the whisper of worlds colliding. Could it endure, or would it flicker out, leaving only echoes? As she slipped into bed, the painting's colors danced behind her eyelids, a promise and a warning. Beauty demanded courage, and she was ready to claim it. The autumn leaves had long surrendered to winter's frost by the time Ayana found herself tracing the familiar paths of Central Park with Beckett at her side. 6 months had woven themselves into their lives like threads in a tapestry, subtle at first, then unbreakable. What began as that charged exchange in the gallery had bloomed into stolen weekends, where the city's clamor receded to a distant hum, leaving space for the quiet unraveling of souls. Ayana's heart, once a fortress of measured caution, now fluttered with an abandon she hadn't known since girlhood dreams under Georgia pines. Each step beside him felt like defiance against the solitude that had shadowed her ambitions, a silent vow that vulnerability could be a strength, not a fracture. Their first picnic had been impulsive, born of a rainy Saturday when Beckett texted her a photo of a weathered blanket from his rarely used storage unit. No algorithms for this, he'd written, just instinct. Ayana had laughed aloud in her Brooklyn apartment, the sound echoing off walls lined with student drawings, crude sketches of futures they dared to envision. She packed a basket heavy with soul food staples, collard greens simmered slow with smoked turkey, cornbread golden and crumbly, fried chicken whose spice lingered like a lover's kiss. As they spread the blanket near the Bethesda fountain, the drizzle misting their faces, Ayana watched Beckett's eyes widen, not with the polite tolerance she'd braced for, but with unfeigned delight. "This," he said, biting into a drumstick, grease shining on his lips, "is revolution on a plate. Tell me the stories behind it, the ones that taste like home." And so she did, her southern drawl unfurling like a river after rain, carrying tales of her mother's kitchen in Macon, where pots clanged like war drums against poverty's siege. Ayana's voice trembled at the edges, not from shame, but from the raw ache of memory. The way her parents' hands, calloused from endless shifts, had kneaded dough with the same tenderness they offered her dreams. Beckett listened, cross-legged on the damp grass, his usual poise cracked open. He shared fragments of his own fractured legacy. Summers at a Hamptons estate where laughter rang hollow, echoing off marble floors that his father's mergers had bought but never warmed. "Wealth's a thief," he admitted, his green eyes darkening like storm-tossed seas. "It steals the mess, the real stuff that binds people." Ayana's chest constricted with empathy, her fingers brushing his in a gesture that sealed something unspoken. In that moment, under the weeping willows, she felt the spark from the gallery ignite into a steady flame, warming the chill of her guarded heart. But shadows lingered, subtle as the first frost. As weeks blurred into months, Beckett's phone would buzz with calls he silenced too quickly, his jaw tightening like a lock clicked shut. Ayana noticed, of course. How could she not? Her work demanded she read the unspoken, decipher the hesitations in young faces before they hardened into walls. One evening after a Juneteenth festival in Harlem, where drums thrummed through her veins like ancestral blood, she confronted him gently over rooftop tacos, the city lights sprawling below like a glittering confession. "You're holding back," she said, her voice soft but unyielding, the festival's joy still humming in her bones. "This family you mention in whispers, who are they, Beckett? Ghosts or gatekeepers?" He paused, fork midway to his mouth, the vulnerability from their early talks fracturing under the weight of truth. Ayana's pulse quickened, a familiar dread coiling in her gut, the fear that this bridge they'd built might span an abyss too wide. Beckett set his fork down, running a hand through his tousled hair, his expression a war of longing and loyalty. "They're complicated," he began, words tumbling haltingly. "Dad built an empire from garages to global deals that reshaped industries. Mom curates the life that polishes it all. My siblings? They're woven into that fabric, Donovan with his hedge fund wizardry, Sloan turning influence into currency. It's a world of expectations, Ayana, where love's measured in legacies, not laughter." His voice cracked on the last word, and Ayana's heart twisted, seeing the boy beneath the CEO, the one starved for the authenticity she offered freely. She reached across the table, her palm cupping his cheek, thumb tracing the line of his jaw with a tenderness that belied her inner storm. "And you? Where do you fit in that tapestry?" The question hung between them, heavy with the unsaid. Was she a thread he dared to weave in, or a snag he'd excise to keep the pattern pristine? Beckett leaned into her touch, eyes closing briefly as if drawing strength from her warmth. "With you," he murmured, "I fit. No masks, no mergers. Just us." Relief flooded Ayana, sweet and sharp, dissolving the knot in her chest. They kissed then, slow and deep, the city's pulse fading to their shared rhythm. Yet even in that embrace, a whisper of doubt lingered, like smoke from a doused fire. How long before those gatekeepers demanded their toll? The tension simmered through their escapades, an undercurrent that only heightened the highs. Their trip to New Orleans became legend in Ayana's memory, a whirlwind of jazz-soaked nights where the Delta's spirit seemed to conspire in their favor. They'd wandered the French Quarter hand in hand, the air thick with magnolia and mischief, beads from Mardi Gras strands catching in Ayana's straight hair like stars in a midnight sky. At a dimly lit club on Frenchman Street, where trumpets wailed laments and loves lost, Beckett pulled her onto the cramped dance floor. His movements were earnest, unpolished, far from the waltzes of his upbringing, mirroring her own sway born of backyard barbecues and church revivals. Ayana laughed, head thrown back, the sound pure and unfiltered, her body alive with the thrill of being claimed without conquest. But midway through a sultry saxophone solo, his phone vibrated insistently in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, color draining from his face. "Mom," he mouthed, apology in his eyes. Ayana nodded, stepping back to give him space, but the music's joy curdled in her throat as she caught fragments. "Choices have consequences, Beckett. Think of the family." Her heart plummeted. A stone skipped across bayou waters, rippling with the old fears of being the choice that unraveled empires. When he returned, face etched with strain, she masked her hurt with a smile, pulling him back into the dance. "Let the music drown it out," she whispered, her arms around his neck a lifeline. Beckett nodded, burying his face in her hair, but Ayana felt the fracture, a hairline crack in their foundation, threatening to widen. As summer yielded to fall once more, the weight pressed heavier. Ayana threw herself into her work, channeling the unease into late nights crafting proposals for expanded mentorships, her office a glow of determination amid Brooklyn's shadowed streets. Beckett's visits grew fervent, as if compensating. Surprise deliveries of her favorite pralines, notes scrawled with promises of us against the tide. Yet the evasion gnawed at her, a quiet erosion of trust. One crisp evening, as they strolled the High Line's elevated paths, iron rails humming with the trains below, Ayana stopped, turning to face him under a canopy of wildflowers. "I need all of you, Beckett, not just the parts that fit my world. Introduce me, or let's build ours without ghosts." His silence stretched agonizingly, green eyes stormy with conflict. Ayana's breath caught, tears pricking unbidden, the terror of losing this rare harmony clashing with the fiercer fear of half measures. Then, like dawn breaking, he exhaled, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "No more ghosts," he vowed, dropping to one knee amid the rustling grasses. The ring, a simple gold band inset with a single, flawless sapphire, heirloom from a grandmother who'd defied her era's chains, gleamed like a beacon. "Ayana, you're my reckoning, my home. Marry me. Let's weave a world that's ours alone." Tears spilled freely now, joy crashing over doubt like waves on levees. Ayana's yes emerged as a breathless prayer, her embrace fierce, sealing the vow against the encroaching shadows. In that suspended moment, with the city sprawling below, like a canvas awaiting their mark, she believed, fiercely, foolishly, in the strength of their thread. But deep in her bones, the Delta's winds whispered warnings. True reckonings demanded storms, and theirs was only beginning to brew. The sapphire ring caught the morning light filtering through Ayana's Brooklyn brownstone windows, a quiet talisman against the uncertainties that had shadowed their engagement. 6 weeks had passed since that highline proposal, each day a delicate balance of ecstasy and apprehension. Ayana's fingers, still tracing the band's cool surface, trembled with the aftershocks of joy. Nights tangled in sheets, whispering futures where her mentorship programs thrived alongside Beckett's ventures, their worlds not clashing but converging like rivers to sea. Yet doubt lingered, a persistent undercurrent, as insistent as the distant rumble of the F train beneath her floorboards. She stood before her full-length mirror, adjusting the collar of a silk blouse the color of midnight skies, her straight hair falling like a polished curtain. Today was the day. Brunch at the Harrington penthouse on Fifth Avenue, the first formal unveiling of her to the family whose whispers had haunted Beckett's silences. Her heart pounded a staccato rhythm, a drumbeat of nerves laced with defiance. Ayana had spent the evening before curating her armor, not just the blouse and tailored slacks that hugged her curves with professional poise, but a small woven basket from her Macon hometown, filled with pecan pralines wrapped in wax paper, their sweetness a bridge from her soil to theirs. "Bring a piece of you," Beckett had urged over late-night calls, his voice thick with the same unease knotting her stomach. But as the elevator whisked them upward in a whisper of assent, Ayana gripped the basket tighter, her knuckles paling against her rich skin. What if her piece was deemed too coarse, too colored for their crystal vaults? The thought clawed at her throat, evoking memories of job interviews where her passion was praised but her presence politely sidelined. She glanced at Beckett, his hand warm in hers, his jaw set with a determination that mirrored her own. "We've got this," he murmured, squeezing gently. Ayana nodded, swallowing the lump of fear, her love for him a fierce anchor amid the rising tide of what-ifs. The penthouse doors parted like theater curtains, revealing a realm of understated excess. Floor-to-ceiling windows framing Central Park's autumn blaze, walls adorned with Rothkos that bled emotion in muted strokes, air scented with bergamot and old money. Genevieve Harrington glided forward first, a vision in pearl gray cashmere, her silver-streaked bob impeccable, smile as crisp as fresh linen. At 60, she embodied the quiet command of society columns, curator of galas, whisperer of alliances. "Beckett, darling," she cooed, pecking his cheek before turning to Ayana, her blue eyes appraising like a jeweler with flawed gems. "And you must be Ayana. How intriguing." The word landed softly, but Ayana felt its edges. Curious, yes, but laced with the chill of assessment. She extended the basket, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "Pralines from my family's recipe. A taste of Georgia to share." Genevieve accepted it with manicured fingers, her nostrils flaring subtly at the warm, nutty aroma wafting free. "How quaint," she replied, setting it aside on a marble console, as if it were a charming relic from a bygone fair. Ayana's smile faltered, a pang of rejection twisting like a knife, her heritage offered in vulnerability, dismissed with a syllable. Harlan Harrington loomed next, broad and silver-haired, his handshake firm but fleeting, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. The patriarch of Harrington Dynamics, he'd forged fortunes from Silicon Dreams, his voice a gravelly timbre honed in boardrooms. "Welcome," he boomed, though his gaze skimmed her like a contract clause to skim later. "Beckett's told us. Bits. Sit. Sit. Coffee's brewing. Ethiopian, single origin." The table gleamed under a cascade of sunlight, laden with artisanal croissants and artisanal jams that whispered of Provence and privilege. Donovan, Beckett's elder brother, occupied the head, his hedge fund polish evident in the crisp lines of his button-down, cufflinks glinting like tiny accusations. Beside him sat Sloane, his wife, her blonde waves cascading artfully, Instagram-ready poise masking the influencer empire she'd built on sponsored serenity. Ronan, the youngest at 28, slouched with boyish charm, his graphic tee a subtle rebellion against the family's tailored tide. As seats were claimed, Ayana felt the room's invisible currents shift, eyes converging on her like spotlights on a stage unready. Conversation flowed in rivulets at first. Harlan regaling the table with a recent acquisition, a software patent that promised to revolutionize supply chains, his laughter booming like thunder over prairies. Ayana nodded, interjecting thoughtfully about ethical sourcing in tech, her words drawing a brief flicker of interest from Ronan. "That's the angle we need," he said, leaning forward, his grin genuine, cutting through the frost. "Kids like the ones you work with, they're the future coders, right? Underdogs coding the next wave." Ayana's heart swelled at the validation, a brief bloom of warmth amid the chill. Here was an ally, untainted by the elder's reserve, but the undercurrents swelled. Genevieve, sipping her coffee with the delicacy of a porcelain doll, tilted her head toward Ayana. "Beckett mentioned your endeavors. Mentoring, was it? In Brooklyn?" The question hung, polite veneer over probing steel. Ayana straightened, pride igniting like embers fanned to flame. "Yes, guiding Black youth toward tech and arts. Last quarter we placed 15 interns in internships. It's about equity, giving them tools to claim their space." Her voice carried the fire of conviction, that southern lilt wrapping her words in honeyed resolve. Genevieve's lips pursed faintly, a smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Noble, truly. Such passion for the underserved. It must be rewarding in its way." The qualifier, in its way, struck like a veiled slap, implying her work a sideline, not a summit. Ayana's cheeks burned, not from flattery but the sting of diminishment. Her achievements reduced to charity's footnote. Donovan chimed in then, his tone casual as a stock tip. "Equity's the buzzword now, isn't it? We're funding a diversity initiative. Token hires to check boxes. Works wonders for PR." Sloane nodded, scrolling her phone discreetly, then glancing up with a saccharine smile. "Adorable, really. I did a post on Urban Uplift last month. Got 10,000 likes. What's your handle? We could collab." Ayana's stomach churned, the offer feeling less like a partnership and more like a pat on the head. Her life's fire, repackaged for algorithms and aesthetics. Whispers followed, soft but slicing. Sloane to Donovan. "She's different, isn't she? Bold choice for Beck." He murmured back, "Family's image. Harlan won't love the optics." Ayana's ears burned, the words coiling around her heart like vines, squeezing the air from her lungs. She glanced at Beckett, pleading silently for intervention. But he carved his grapefruit with mechanical precision, gaze averted, trapped in the crossfire of loyalties. Ronan's foot nudged hers under the table, a silent, "hang in," but it did little to staunch the bleed of isolation creeping through her veins. The pralines sat untouched, their sweetness mocking her gesture, a symbol of bridges half-built. As plates cleared, Harlan steered to safer waters, golf scores and gala invites, but the damage lingered, a bruise blooming beneath Ayana's skin. Genevieve's parting embrace was airlight, perfume cloying. "Do visit again, dear. We're all about expanding horizons." The condescension dripped, sweet as poisoned honey, leaving Ayana adrift in a sea of polished facades. In the elevator's descent, tears welled unbidden, hot tracks down her cheeks. Beckett pulled her close, his arms a harbor against the storm. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice ragged with regret. "They're set in their ways. Old guards, slow to shift. But they'll see you, Ayana. The fire in you. It's undeniable. Give them time." She leaned into him, inhaling the familiar cedar of his scent, her sobs muffled against his shirt. "Time?" The word echoed hollow, a plea from the privileged blind to their own barriers. Ayana's mind raced with the evening's echoes, the quaint dismissals, the whispered optics, the untouched pralines like offerings spurned. Hurt warred with resolve in her chest, a tempest threatening to drown the love that had carried her here. "I need them to see me now, Beckett," she said finally, voice cracking like dry earth. "Not as a horizon to expand, but as the center of my own world, and yours." He cupped her face, thumbs brushing away tears, eyes fierce with promise. "You are. Swear it. We'll make them see, or we'll build without them. Ayana searched his gaze, finding the spark from the gallery still burning, dimmed but defiant. She nodded, wiping her eyes, the ache in her heart sharpening into something steely. Determination, unyielding as delta clay. As they stepped into the sun-dappled street, hand in hand, she clung to that vow, even as doubt's shadow stretched long. Love was a reckoning after all, and hers, she sensed, would demand a fiercer storm to truly break through. The echo of Genevieve's parting words, expanding horizons, clung to Ayana like a damp fog as she and Beckett navigated the labyrinthine streets back to Brooklyn, the city's autumn symphony a mocking counterpoint to the ache hollowing her chest. That brunch had been a baptism by ice water, submerging her hopes in the chill of subtle exclusions, leaving her gasping for the warmth they'd forged in stolen moments. Yet love, stubborn as kudzu, wrapped tighter around her resolve. In the weeks that followed, Ayana threw herself into the union with a fervor bordering on ferocity, determined to prove, to herself, to Beckett, to the ghosts of Fifth Avenue, that bridges could be built from the sturdiest timbers of compromise. She enrolled in online coding courses, her nights blurring into a haze of syntax and screens, fingers flying over keys in a bid to mirror Beckett's world. For us, she'd whisper to her reflection in the glow of her laptop, ignoring the exhaustion etching lines around her eyes. Each mastered loop, each debugged function, felt like a step across the divide, a way to whisper, "I see you too." Marriage unfurled in fits and starts, a tapestry of tender intimacies threaded with invisible barbs. Their wedding had been a quiet affair in a Harlem brownstone garden, vows exchanged under a canopy of dogwood blossoms. Ronan's best man toast the only familial concession, a heartfelt ramble about finding the code that cracks the heart's firewall. Ayana had beamed through tears, her straight hair woven with fresh magnolias, heart swelling at Beckett's gaze, fierce and unblinking, as if she were the algorithm solving his every equation. But the honeymoon's haze lifted to reveal the penthouse's shadow looming larger. Ayana moved into their Soho loft, a sleek expanse of glass and steel where her woven baskets from Macon sat like islands in a sea of minimalism. She adapted, curating corners with touches of her Delta soul, framed student sketches beside Beckett's abstract prints, soul records spinning on lazy Sundays to counter the hum of his home office servers. Yet the family's orbit pulled inexorably, drawing her into its gravitational chill. Charity galas became her battlefield, where Ayana glided in tailored gowns that accentuated her lithe form, her presence a calculated blend of poise and plea. At one such event, a glittering fundraiser for urban arts at the Met, she'd pitched her mentorship program's expansion to a cluster of Harrington donors, her voice steady as she outlined pathways for Black youth into creative industries. "It's not charity," she insisted, eyes locking with Harlan's across the crystal flutes. "It's investment, in voices long silenced, stories that will redefine the canvas." Applause rippled, polite and perfunctory, but Genevieve's later aside over caviar canapés sliced deeper. "Such eloquence, dear, though one wonders if the boardrooms are quite ready for unpolished narratives." Ayana's smile had frozen, a porcelain mask cracking inward, the dismissal coiling like smoke in her lungs. She excused herself to the terrace, gripping the balustrade until her knuckles ached, the city's lights blurring through unshed tears. Unpolished? The word festered, a reminder that her fire, no matter how honed, was still deemed rough-hewn in their eyes. Beckett found her there, his arms encircling her waist from behind, chin resting on her shoulder as the night air nipped at their skin. "You're brilliant," he murmured, lips brushing her ear, his breath a balm against the sting. "They'll come around, or they won't. But you're my North Star." Ayana leaned back into him, the solid wall of his chest a temporary fortress, her body melting against his in a silent plea for absolution. In those moments, doubt dissolved, replaced by the electric hum of their connection. The way his fingers traced lazy patterns on her abdomen, igniting sparks that chased shadows away. They made love that night in the loft's king bed, urgent and unhurried, her gasps mingling with his vows of forever, bodies entwining like roots seeking common soil. Ayana clung to those nights, her heart a fragile bloom in the greenhouse of his adoration, convincing herself that love's light could outshine the encroaching dusk. But the family's dinners, those obligatory rituals every quarter, were the true crucible, where barbs honed to scalpels drew blood in measured incisions. The first, mere months after the wedding, unfolded in a private club overlooking the Hudson, mahogany panels absorbing the low murmur of old money. Ayana arrived with a bottle of artisanal hot sauce from a Savannah distillery, a nod to her roots, but it sat unopened as Harlan dominated discourse on market volatilities, his gravelly baritone dismissing her interjection on inclusive fintech with a paternal pat. Insightful, Ayana, but let's keep the idealism for the nonprofit circuit. Genevieve's gaze lingered on Ayana's hair then, straight and gleaming under the chandelier's glow. You've such lovely length. Do tell, is it extensions? So modern, blending cultures. The question, innocuous to outsiders, landed like acid on Ayana's pride, implying artifice where she wore authenticity like armor. Her throat tightened, words curdling on her tongue, as Sloane chimed in with a trill. Oh, I tried straighteners once. Disaster for my waves. Yours holds so exotically. Laughter tinkled like breaking glass, and Ayana forced a chuckle, her insides twisting with the humiliation of being exoticized, a specimen under their collective lens. Beckett's hand found hers under the damask cloth, a squeeze of solidarity, but his silence spoke volumes. Torn between her hurt and their legacy, he swallowed retorts like bitter pills. Ayana's chest constricted with betrayal's quiet fury, the man who'd knelt in wildflowers now a spectator to her diminishment. Subsequent gatherings layered the wounds. Donovan's quip at Thanksgiving about her charming drawl, straight out of a Faulkner novel, isn't it? Drawing chuckles while her contributions to the conversation evaporated like mist. Genevieve's probing at Easter on her fulfilling career. Mentoring must be so hands-on. Do they ever get overwhelming? Those dynamics? Framing her passion as peril, her students as burdens rather than beacons. Each sally chipped at Ayana's veneer, eroding the confidence she'd carried into the marriage, leaving her adrift in a sea of self-doubt. Nights after, she'd curl into Beckett's side, voice muffled in pillows. Why don't you say something? Am I fighting alone? He'd hold her tighter, apologies tumbling like rain. I hate it, Ayana. They're my blood, but you're my heart. I'll do better. Yet the pattern persisted, his promises evaporating in the heat of confrontation. Amid the erosion, triumphs flickered like distant stars. Ayana's project crested a milestone. 50 black youth, from Bronx stoops to Queens basements, securing spots at HBCUs and tech apprenticeships. Their acceptance letters a mosaic of possibility pinned to her office wall. The celebration was intimate, a rooftop gathering in Bed-Stuy with her mentees' families, laughter roaring over grilled plantains and hip-hop anthems. Beckett arrived late from a merger close, scooping her into a bear hug that lifted her feet from the deck. You did that, he breathed, pride etching his features like sunlight on water, his kiss fierce with shared victory. Ayana's heart soared, the validation a salve to scarred places, her body arching into his as cheers erupted around them. For a breath the world aligned, her fire reflected in his eyes unmarred by margins. Yet even that joy filtered through the family's prism. At the next dinner, Harlan nodded curtly over her news. Impressive numbers, though scaling to real impact might require broader alliances. Genevieve's toast rang hollow. To Ayana's little victories, may they pave grander paths. The qualifiers stung anew, reducing her summit to a stepping stone in their shadowed empire. Ayana excused herself early that night, tears held until the cab's anonymity, her reflection in the window a stranger. Beautiful, unbroken, but fraying at the seams. As the 6th anniversary loomed, a lavish dinner was planned at a Hudson Yards rooftop, Genevieve's gift of orchestration. Ayana stood before her closet, fingers trailing fabrics like ghosts of resolve. Beckett had been distant all week, buried in calls, his touches fleeting, silences stretching like taut wires. Her stomach knotted with foreboding, a delta storm brewing in her veins. The sense that this meal would be no celebration, but a crossroads where threads might snap. She selected a crimson sheath, its cut a defiant embrace of her form, and met her eyes in the mirror. "You've endured," she told herself, voice a whisper of steel. "But endurance has limits." As Beckett's key turned in the lock, the air thickened with unspoken tempests, pulling her toward the precipice where silence might finally shatter. The crimson sheath clung to Ayana like a second pulse as she stepped from the car into the Hudson Yards evening, the fabric silk whispering against her skin, a defiant caress amid the gathering storm. Beckett's hand at the small of her back guided her toward the rooftop elevator, his touch a fleeting anchor in the churn of her gut. The past week's silences had woven a shroud around him, his eyes distant during hurried breakfasts, his affections reduced to perfunctory kisses at doorways. Ayana had traced the lines of worry etching his brow, her questions met with deflections. "Just work, love. Nothing to dim our night." But the air between them crackled with unspoken fractures, mirroring the city's skyline fractured by twilight's encroaching indigo. As the elevator ascended, smooth and silent, Ayana's heart hammered against her ribs, a wild bird caged in bone. This dinner, orchestrated by Genevieve as their grand sixth, loomed not as a celebration, but as a gauntlet, the family's orbit tightening like a noose around her throat. She smoothed her hair, straight and gleaming under the cab's harsh lights, willing poise to armor the vulnerability clawing upward. The rooftop unveiled itself in a gasp of opulence, a sprawling terrace suspended above the vessel's skeletal spires, where the Hudson's dark ribbon unfurled toward Jersey's hazy silhouette. String lights draped like indolent jewels, casting a golden haze over linen-draped tables and low-slung loungers. The jazz trio's saxophone weaving languid spells through the chill. The Harringtons occupied the prime corner, a tableau of composed entitlement, Genevieve in emerald velvet that pooled like envy at her feet, Harlan nursing a Scotch neat, Donovan and Sloane entwined in murmured asides, Ronan fiddling with his napkin in quiet discomfort. Ayana's breath hitched as their heads turned in unison, appraisals slicing through the air sharper than the wind off the river. Beckett's grip tightened fractionally, a silent, "We're in this," but her skin prickled under the scrutiny. The crimson dress suddenly less shield and more spotlight, illuminating every curve as if to mock her intrusion. Genevieve rose first, fluid as smoke, her air kiss hovering inches from Ayana's cheek. A deliberate evasion, lips pursing in the barest graze of air, as if contact might tarnish her porcelain facade. "Ayana, darling," she purred, the endearment dripping with the viscosity of syrup laced with arsenic. "You chose bold tonight. Crimson suits the occasion, though one must mind the shadows up here." Ayana's smile locked in place, a porcelain veneer over the burn of implication. Too vivid, too much, an outsider's flair in our muted palette. She murmured thanks, throat dry as dust. While Harlan extended a hand, his clasp brief and bone-crushing, eyes already drifting back to his phone's ticker tape. "Markets wait for no anniversaries," he grunted, not quite to her, launching into a monologue on volatility indices without pause. The numbers tumbling like indictments. Dow's jittery, tariffs looming like bad debts. Ayana nodded, sinking into her seat, the leather cool against her thighs, her presence an ellipsis in his narrative, erased before inscribed. The table settled into a fragile equilibrium, menus arriving like ornate shields, vellum-bound tomes listing entrees whose prices eclipsed her monthly mentorship stipends. Donovan, ever the alpha in his Brioni weave, leaned back with a predatory ease, swirling his Cabernet as if divining futures in its legs. "Maldives again last quarter," he announced to the circle, voice booming with the casual arrogance of the untethered. "Private yacht, dolphins shadowing the hull like scouts. You two should try it. Nothing beats surfacing in that turquoise void." His gaze landed on Ayana, expectant, a challenge veiled as an invitation. Her fork paused midair, the amuse-bouche, a delicate foie gras quenelle, turning leaden on her tongue. "Sounds idyllic," she replied, forcing warmth into her tone, the southern lilt she couldn't quite mute curling around the words like kudzu on iron. "We lean toward road trips myself, coastal drives, hidden beaches off the grid. There's a raw magic in stumbling on them, unscripted. Donovan's laugh barked short, a punctuation of pity. Local camping? Charming. Keeps things grounded, I suppose. Not everyone's cut for the deep blue. The table tittered, a ripple of crystal clinks masking the undercurrent. But Ayana felt it lash her core. Grounded as code for lesser, her adventures pedestrian in their parochial palate. Heat flushed her cheeks, not from wine but the slow bleed of diminishment, her joys dissected and discarded like flawed specimens. Sloane, sensing the lull, extended her left hand with a theatrical flourish, the 10-carat solitaire winking like a taunt under the lights. Speaking of unscripted, she cooed, twisting her wrist to cascade facets across Ayana's vision. Donnie's proposal, heli-skiing in Aspen, ring dropped mid-descent. Heart-stopping, literally. The stone dwarfed the simple sapphire band on Ayana's finger. Heirloom modest and meaningful, a vow forged in wildflowers, not extravagance. Sloane's eyes flicked to it, lips curving in a simper. Yours must have been intimate, sweet in its way. Those heartfelt gestures linger, don't they? Ayana's throat constricted, the comparison a scalpel to her sentiment, reducing their starlit promise to a quaint relic. Sweet, the word echoed the brunch's quaint, a lexicon of condescension compiling her inadequacies. She traced the sapphire's edge, memories flooding. Beckett's knee in the high-line grass, voice raw with "You're my reckoning." The ache bloomed sharp, a thorn in her chest, mingling pride with the sting of exposure. Intimate, yes, she managed, voice a thread of steel over silk. Real moments etched deeper than spectacle. But Sloane's nod was absent, already scrolling her phone. The dismissal a fresh incision. Beckett's hand found hers beneath the tablecloth, fingers interlacing in a desperate morse of support. Squeeze, hold, release. A lifeline thrown across the widening chasm. Ayana clung to it, her pulse sinking with his, drawing scant comfort from the warmth seeping through his palm. Yet he said nothing, gaze fixed on his untouched salad, the greens wilting like unspoken defenses. Betrayal flickered in her gut, hot and twisting. Not rage, but a profound sorrow. The man who danced with her in New Orleans, now a statue amid the fray. Ronan's voice cut the haze, low and conspiratorial from across the linen sea. You look stunning, Ayana. Crimson's your color, owns the night. His wink was a buoy, genuine amid the artifice, and for a heartbeat, gratitude swelled, easing the vice around her lungs. Ronan, the outlier, his quiet rebellions a faint echo of her own. The waiter's procession shattered the moment, appetizers fanning out like peace offerings, seared scallops nestled in citrus foam, heirloom tomato tartlets blushing under balsamic veils. Ayana speared a scallop, the fork's tine scraping porcelain a stark underscore to the rising tension. Each bite turned ashen in her mouth, flavors muted by the thickening air, the jazz trio's melody now a dirge underscoring her isolation. Genevieve's laughter trilled suddenly, sharp as shattering crystal, recounting a Hampton soiree where the chef imported truffles from Perigord. Divine, though the traffic was murder. Harlan grunted approval, Donovan layering on with yacht anecdotes, the circle closing tighter, their voices a chorus excluding her timbre. Ayana felt herself contracting, shoulders hunching imperceptibly, the crimson sheath no longer embracing but constriction, squeezing the breath from her resolve. The skyline mocked from beyond the glass balustrade, towers of glass and ambition, indifferent to the woman shrinking within one. As the plates cleared with balletic efficiency, Ayana's gaze drifted to Beckett, pleading in its silence. Speak now, love, claim our space. But his eyes remained downcast, jaw clenched in impotent fury she could almost taste. The hand in hers gone slack. Despair welled, cold and viscous, pooling in her belly, a tide eroding the shores of her endurance. The wind gusted sharper, rattling the terrace screens, mirroring the Gale building within. How much longer could she swallow the shards, feigning fortitude for the sake of a vow fraying at its hems? Ronan's sympathetic glance met hers, a fleeting solidarity, but it couldn't stem the swell. The main courses loomed on the horizon, menus folding like closing traps, and Ayana braced, heart a war drum in the gathering dusk, knowing this night teetered on the razor's edge where silence might finally yield to storm. The main courses arrived like heralds of deeper reckoning, borne on silver trays by waitstaff whose deference bordered on invisibility, their gloved hands arranging porcelain altars of foie gras and truffled risotto with ritual precision. Ayana stared at her plate, a seared duck breast fanned artfully beside microgreens and a quenelle of foie, its richness clashing with the bile rising in her throat. The jazz trio shifted to a mournful Coltrane riff, the saxophone's wail a keening echo of the turmoil coiling in her chest. She prodded the meat, forks scraping like nails on a chalkboard in her mind, each bite a mechanical surrender to the evening's inexorable march. Beckett's thigh pressed against hers under the table, a mute plea for endurance, but the contact felt hollow now, his silence a widening gulf where solidarity should have stood. Ayana's gaze flicked to Genevieve, whose fork danced daintily through her own portion, and braced for the next volley. Knowing in the marrow of her bones that the appetizer's barbs were mere feints, the true assault yet to crest. Genevieve obliged without delay, her eyes alighting on Ayana's hair, as if it were a curiosity in a vitrine, the straight strands catching the string lights in a halo of unintended allure. That length is enviable, Ayana. Such sleekness for an evening like this. Do you find it holds in this humidity? Or is it a treatment from one of those trendy salons in Flatiron? They do wonders for texture challenges. The words slithered out, velvet over venom, the pause before texture challenges, a scalpel's kiss to Ayana's heritage, implying her natural crown, even tame to straight submission, remained a battleground unfit for their refined stage. Ayana's fork halted, the duck's juice pooling like blood around her utensil, a flush creeping up her neck not from the wine, but the raw exposure. Her choice to straighten, a concession to boardrooms and galas, now weaponized as exotic defect. Laughter bubbled from Sloane, a champagne fizz of complicity. Oh, Genevieve, you're terrible. But honestly, Ayana, it's stunning, almost runway ready. I could never pull off that drama without extensions snapping by midnight. The table's murmur swelled in agreement, a chorus of half nods and sips. Harlan's grunt, the bass note underscoring the casual cruelty. Ayana's chest tightened, breath shallow as if the rooftop's altitude had thinned the air to knife edge. Stunning? Runway ready? The compliments curdled into caricatures, her beauty refracted through their lens as spectacle, not sovereignty, a performer's prop in their narrative of tolerance. She forced a smile, lips numb, murmuring, "Just me, old faithful straightener from home." But the words tasted like ash, her southern lilt twisting into self-mockery under their gaze. Inside, fury flickered, a spark against the deluge of diminishment, mingling with the deeper wound. The erosion of her authenticity, straightened not just for strands, but for survival in their shadowed empire. Ronan's brow furrowed across the linen, his "it suits you perfectly," effortless, a lone boy in the riptide. But even his warmth couldn't staunch the bleed, the isolation wrapping tighter around her ribs like barbed wire. Harlan cleared his throat then, commandeering the discourse with the authority of a man who'd bent markets to his will, his scotch glass thunking softly against the table as punctuation. "Speaking of drama," he rumbled, eyes gleaming with the thrill of conquest, "close that merger today. Billions in play, supply chains rewired overnight, algorithms dancing like marionettes. It's poetry, really. The elegance of it all." Pride puffed his chest, the table leaning in like courtiers to a king's decree. Donovan layering accolades. "Masterstroke, Dad. Equity firms are scrambling." Ayana nodded, genuine intrigue sparking despite the frost. Her coding forays had gifted her a layman's awe for such machinations. "Fascinating," she ventured, voice threading the needle of engagement. "The predictive modeling, does it account for social variables, like community disruptions in those chains?" Harlan's gaze swiveled to her, appraising, a beat of silence stretching taut before his chuckle boomed, paternal and patronizing. "Social variables? Sharp question, Ayana. But that's the beauty. We strip the noise, focus on the math. Not everyone's wheelhouse these intricacies. Keep the dreamers dreaming elsewhere. The dismissal landed like a gavel, her insight shunted to the sidelines of dreamers, her intellect deemed ornamental fluff unfit for the gears of genuine power. Ayana's stomach plummeted, the duck turning to stone in her gut, a wave of inadequacy crashing over her. Years of late nights decoding loops, bridging her world's grit with his gloss, reduced to whimsical irrelevance. Sloane tittered, forking her risotto with performative delicacy. Exactly. Leave the poetry to the artists. Though Ayana, your nonprofit, sounds like it has that dreamer vibe. So inspiring, wrangling all that urban energy. The pivot to her work was seamless, a feint into familiar terrain laced with fresh poison. Ayana's pulse thundered in her ears, the jazz's crescendo mirroring the crescendo of her inner tempest. Pride warring with the humiliation of being tokenized. Her mission a sideshow to their symphonies of scale. She glanced at Beckett, desperation etching her features. A silent now. Please, defend this piece of me. His fingers twitched in hers, knuckles whitening, but his lips remained sealed, gaze boring into his plate as if it held the script for salvation. The betrayal deepened the cut, a serrated edge twisting in her heart. The man who'd vowed to weave their worlds now complicit in their unraveling. His inertia a louder indictment than any word. Tears pricked, hot and traitorous, but she blinked them back, chin lifting in a fragile bastion of dignity. Sloane, undeterred, withdrew her phone with a flourish, the screen blooming to life under the lights. A cascade of Milan runway snaps, chiffon and silk in feverish arrays. Speaking of elegance, she trilled, angling the device for communal perusal. Snagged this little number last week, straight from the atelier, custom fit. Costs a small fortune, but is worth every euro for that drape. The image filled the table's focus, price tag flaunted like a trophy. Figures eclipsing Ayana's annual nonprofit grant. The excess a stark ledger against her budgeted thrift. Sloane's eyes danced to Ayana's crimson, the comparison unspoken but screaming, yours serviceable, mine sublime. What about you, Ayana? Any recent indulgences? That red's fierce, off-the-rack gem. Ayana's cheeks flamed, the question a spotlight on her restraint, her dress, a cherished find from a Brooklyn boutique, sewn with intention and scrimped savings, now exposed as economy in their economy of excess. Humiliation surged, viscous and choking, her curves once celebrated in Beckett's whispers, now fodder for fiscal judgment. It's special to me, she replied, voice a whisper of resolve cracking at the edges. Bought it thinking of tonight, hoping it'd feel like home. Donovan snorted softly, masking it with a cough. Home's where the heart is, or the atelier. Practical choice, keeps things real. The word practical echoed the brunch's quaint, a growing litany of belittlement, each syllable etching deeper into Ayana's psyche. She set her fork down, the clink a clarion in the hush, and her appetite vanished like mist before dawn. Donovan, scenting blood, steered to lineage next, his probe casual as a cocktail stir. Roots run deep in families like ours. Harlan's side traces to shipping barons. Yours, Ayana? Southern stock, Beckett said. Must be resilient, grinding through those post office queues and garage bays. Not easy, building from the bottom, shapes a certain tenacity. The inquiry, framed as curiosity, reeked of dissection. Her mother's postal grit, her father's mechanic's calluses, pillars of perseverance recast as poverty's punchline. Ayana's throat bobbed, pride flaring defiant against the pitying tilt of his head. Resilient, yes, she said, words sharpening like flint-struck steel. Mom's shifts funded my first laptop. Dad's hands fixed more than engines. They mended dreams deferred. Tenacity? It's the forge that tempers us. But Harlan interjected, waving his scotch like a scepter. Admirable bootstrap tales. Solid foundation, Ayana. Though climbing from there, well, not all ladders reach the penthouse without a boost. The truncation sliced her story mid-breath, Her HBCU forged in fire, dismissed as mere rung. Her ascent a footnote to their silver spoon ascent. Ayana shared a fragment then, voice gaining traction on the embers of her hurt. My alma mater, heart of black excellence, marches echoing in every hall. It wasn't ivy, but it rooted me deep. Harlan's nod was absent. His sturdy start, ambitious leaps from there, eh? A velvet hammer, implying shortfall. Her education a charming detour from destiny's highway. Beckett's grip spasmed in hers, a ghost of intent, but still, no words. His paralysis a chasm swallowing her whole. Sloane sealed the escalation, her voice lilting over dessert menus like a siren's call to carnage. We've been scouting preschools, those elite academies with the wait lists from birth. Tuition's astronomical, but the networks, priceless. Her gaze pinned Ayana, saccharine and searing. U2 planning. State schools are practical for certain situations. Affordable, community-focused. Fits the bill when resources are, well, modest. The phrase certain situations detonated in Ayana's core. A grenade of presumption lobbing her heritage into the bargain bin. Her potential children, her legacy, relegated to modest margins. Rage ignited, white-hot and unquenchable, surging through her veins like delta floodwaters breaching levees. For 6 years she'd swallowed shards, smiling through the sieves. But this evisceration of her unborn world, shattered the dam. Her fork clattered to porcelain, the sound a gunshot in the jazz-laced lull. Fingers trembling, she pushed back her chair, the scrape a thunderclap. Beckett's eyes widened, pleading not yet, but the fire in her chest roared louder than caution. I can't stay silent anymore, she breathed, the words a vow etched in lightning, the table's expectant hush her stage at last. The words I can't stay silent anymore escaped Ayana's lips like a thunderclap rolling low across the Hudson, the rooftop's string lights flickering as if in deference to the shift in the air. She rose from her chair with a grace born of fractured poise, the crimson sheath falling into elegant folds around her form, her straight hair swaying like a banner unfurled in battle. The table froze in tableau, forks suspended mid-lift, wine stems hovering at parted lips. The jazz trio's saxophone trailing into a hesitant note that died unanswered. Ayana's heart thundered in her ears, a war drum pounding against the cage of her ribs, every vein alight with the blaze of 6 years' suppressed tempest. This was no outburst of tears or tremor, no crumbling under the weight, but a deliberate unleashing, her voice emerging calm, edged with the unyielding timbre of Delta steel tempered by Brooklyn fire. Genevieve's manicured hand paused at her throat, Harlan's Scotch glass tilting perilously, Sloane's thumb stilled on her screen mid-scroll, Donovan's smirk evaporating into slack-jawed surprise. Even Beckett's breath caught, his green eyes widening in a cocktail of dread and dawning awe. The hand he'd held now empty, reaching instinctively across the linen void. Ayana drew a breath, deep and anchoring, the cool night air filling her lungs like a vow renewed. The skyline sprawled indifferent behind her, towers of glass mirroring the fragility of the moment. Worlds colliding in silent collision. 6 years, she began, her southern lilt no longer softened but sharpened, each syllable an arrow loosed from a bow, long drawn taut. 6 years I've danced on the edges of your world, Beckett, twisting myself into shapes I thought might fit. I've muted my drawl in boardrooms, straightened not just my hair, but my truths to blend into your polished haze, swallowed the slights about my quaint road trips while you jetted to atolls I've only read of in magazines. Nodded through the noble pats on my mentoring, as if guiding black kids from shadows to spotlights is some charming diversion, not the fire that fuels my every dawn. Her gaze swept the circle, locking on each face with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Genevieve's frost fracturing under the heat, Harlan's bluster buckling like weathered oak, Sloane's performative poise peeling away to reveal the unease beneath. The words poured from her, not in rage's flood, but revelation's river, carving canyons through the complacency that had damned her spirit. Pride surged then, a phoenix rising from the ashes of their dismissals, warming her core against the chill gusting off the river. Ayana's fingers splayed on the table's edge, grounding her as she leaned forward, voice gaining velocity like a gathering gale. But let me tell you what I'm proud of. What no merger or Milan frock can eclipse. This hair? She touched the silken fall cascading over her shoulder, a cascade of midnight threaded with the legacy of women who'd combed resilience into every strand under kerosene lamps and civil rights marches. It's the crown of queens who bent but never broke, straightened now not for your approval, but my own command. My work, it's the sacred charge of pulling futures from the brink. 50 souls this year alone, black and brilliant, stepping into HBCUs where echoes of ancestors roar in every lecture hall. That foundation you deem sturdy? It's bedrock, Harlan, forged in fires you can't fathom, yielding diamonds your vaults envy. Her eyes blazed, tears glistening but unspilled, jewels of defiance catching the lights. The table remained entombed in silence, breaths bated, the saxophone's ghost note hanging like a held breath, the city below humming oblivious to the cataclysm unfolding above. She turned then to Beckett, the pivot a heartbreak etched in motion, her voice softening to a blade's whisper, yet slicing deeper for its tenderness. And you, God, you, the man who saw me in that gallery's chaos and called it creation. I married you for the boy who danced offbeat in New Orleans, who vowed we'd weave worlds without ghosts. But tonight, your hand in mine feels like chains, not choice. You've let them carve me hollow with every unspoken word, every averted glance. My heritage unfitting, my dreams practical, my very breath a quaint curiosity. Silence isn't neutrality, Beckett. It's betrayal wrapped in love's old clothes. The accusation hung, raw and ragged, tearing at her own heartstrings even as it freed them. Love's ache twisting with the fury of abandonment. The man who'd been her reckoning, now complicit in her erasure. Beckett's face crumpled, color draining to ashen pallor, his chair scraping back as he surged to his feet, the motion abrupt as a fault line shift. Tears traced silver paths down his cheeks, unashamed, his broad frame trembling with the quake of realization. Ayana, he choked, voice breaking like thunder's aftermath. You're right. Every lacerating word. I'm the coward here, cloaked in their shadows, too terrified of fracturing the family forge to forge us instead. A shame doesn't cover it. I've failed you, the woman who lit my code when it was all static noise. The confession rippled outward, shattering the hush like glass under heel, eyes darting between husband and wife in a stunned tableau. Genevieve rose unsteadily, her emerald velvet pooling at her ankles like spilled secrets, face pale as moonlit marble, the iron matriarch's facade fracturing into vulnerability's fault lines. She clutched the table's edge, knuckles blooming white, her blue eyes, once appraising ice, now swimming with a tempest of regret. He's right, she whispered, the admission a sob swallowed whole, her voice quavering as if dredged from depths long sealed. Cruelty's my inheritance, Ayana, cloaked in courtesy, wielded to guard a throne built on fears I dare not name. Your fire, it scorches my certainties, reminds me of the girl I buried under gallus and genealogies, the one who dreamed without pedigrees. Jealousy, plain and poisonous. Your strength unmasks my fragility. I've projected shadows onto your light, and for that, forgive me if you can muster it for a fool's folly. The words tumbled, unvarnished, Genevieve's arms extending in a gesture of raw supplication, pulling Ayana into an embrace that trembled with the weight of first true touch. Warm, wrenching, the perfume of bergamot mingling with tears. Harlan remained seated, a monolith cracked, his scotch forgotten as he processed the unraveling, jaw working silently before gravel emerged. We've been blind architects, building walls where windows should stand. You deserved welcome, not wounds. My oversight, epic and inexcusable. Amend? If you'll allow this old builder a blueprint for better. Sparse, the words but sincere, a seed planted in fallow soil. Sloane's phone clattered to the table, Forgotten idol toppled, real tears streaking her flawless makeup as she stood, voice small against the wind. Envy's my venom too. Your unscripted joy with him? It mocks my scripted shine. Sour since the start, meaner still. Rebuild, Ayana, please. Donovan nodded mutely, shame etching his features, while Ronan's quiet, finally, broke into a relieved grin, his hand clapping Beckett's shoulder in solidarity. The table exhaled collectively, the silence yielding to a tentative thaw. Apologies weaving into hugs, arms encircling in a circle broken and remade. Ayana sank back into her seat, body quaking with the aftershocks of release. Beckett's arm around her shoulders, a renewed vow. His whispers of, I choose you, always now fierce, a balm to the raw edges. The jazz trio, sensing the pivot, eased into a softer ballad, saxophone crooning redemption's refrain. Conversation bloomed anew, fragile petals in frost-kissed dawn, Genevieve leaning in, eyes alight with genuine curiosity. Tell me more of those HBCU echoes. What marches fuel your program? Harlan probing with unfeigned interest. Social variables and chains. Your angle, Ayana. Let's dissect it properly. Sloan, phone silence, soliciting. That urban energy you wrangle. Strategies for my next collab? Real ones, not likes. Laughter threaded through, tentative then true. The rooftops chill, yielding to shared warmth. Ayana's project unfolding like a map to uncharted alliances. As desserts wheeled forth, chocolate ganache, veiling berries like secrets softened, Ayana felt the storm's eyes settle, exhaustion mingling with exhilaration in her bones. The skyline twinkled complicit now, witness to a fracture mended in the forge of her voice. Beckett's kiss to her temple lingered, a seal on the night's alchemy. But beneath the harmony hummed a deeper query. Could this hush endure the dawn, or was it merely an interlude before the next gale? The wind whispered no answers, carrying them toward home's uncertain harbor, where reckonings once voiced demanded deeds to echo. The ganache's velvet cloak over ruby berries did little to sweeten the aftertaste of revelation, each spoonful a ritual reclaiming the rooftop from rupture's rubble. Ayana savored the tart burst on her tongue, the chocolate's melt a metaphor for the night's alchemy, bitter foundations yielding to unforeseen silk. Beckett's arm remained a steady curve around her shoulders, his thumb tracing absent circles on her upper arm, each pass a whispered litany of atonement, his body heat a firewall against the wind's insistent probe. The apologies had cascaded like a dam breached, flooding the terrace with raw confessions that hung in the air, heavy with the scent of river mist and possibility. Ayana's body, still humming with the quake of her unleashing, leaned into him, exhaustion weaving through her limbs like twilight's gentle siege. Yet beneath the languor stirred a vigilant ember, gratitude laced with guarded hope, her heart a sentinel scanning the horizon for dawn's true colors. The jazz trio, attuned to the shift, coaxed a lighter melody from their instruments, clarinet lilting like laughter rediscovered. The rooftops hush, evolving into a tentative symphony of reconnection. Genevieve, her emerald velvet now rumpled from the embrace's fervor, leaned across the table with a vulnerability that softened her sharp edges. Eyes, once glacial appraisals, now pools of earnest inquiry. Those HBCU echoes you spoke of, Ayana, she ventured, voice threading the jazz's undercurrent like a needle through fine weave. The marches fueling your program. What do they sound like in the quiet hours? I've only read the histories, never felt their pulse. The question landed not as a probe, but a pilgrimage. Genevieve's fingers twisting her napkin in uncharacteristic fidget, the matriarch unmasked as a seeker. Ayana paused, berry poised midair, the sincerity catching her off guard. A bridge extended not from obligation, but origin's ache. Her chest expanded with a breath unburdened, the pride she'd armored swelling freely now. Like heartbeats in the dark, she replied, voice resonant with the rhythm of recalled rhythms, low and insistent, syncing with the ones who marched before. Selma's steps echoing in code labs, Birmingham's fire lighting late-night study halls. It's not just history, it's inheritance, Genevieve, passed hand to hand, generation to generation, unbreakable as the roots that hold the delta soil. The words wove their spell, drawing nods from the circle, Harlan's gravelly interjection rumbling forth like thunder's echo. Inheritance, he mused, leaning forward, elbows on linen in uncharacteristic disarray, his wire-rimmed gaze sharpening with the hunger of a builder eyeing untapped quarries. Reminds me of supply chains, vulnerable links, but fortified right. They hold empires. Your social variables, Ayana, disruptions in those urban chains. Let's unpack it. How would you thread equity into the models? Real blueprints, not boardroom fluff. The pivot from dismissal to dialogue sent a thrill through Ayana's veins, validation blooming warm in her core. The patriarch's mind, once a monolith of metrics, now cracking open to her contours. She set her spoon down, leaning in, the crimson sheath shifting like a conspirator's cloak. Start with the margins, she explained, words flowing with the fervor of a teacher igniting sparks. Map the human costs, lost wages in overlooked communities, the ripple of one factory's shadow on a neighborhood's dreams. Algorithms tuned to profit alone? They blindside, weave inequity metrics, diverse data sets from those very streets, and you predict not just markets but mending. Harlan's eyes lit, a rare grin cracking his facade, scribbling notes on a napkin with the intensity of a merger memo. By God, that's the missing variable. Practical poetry. We'll talk shop, Ayana. Breakfast next week? Sloane, makeup streaked but spirit rekindled, pocketed her phone with deliberate finality, the device a relic of distractions discarded. Urban energy, you're wrangling of it, she said, voice shedding its trill for timbre, leaning elbows on the table in mimicry of Harlan's earnest hunch. My next collab stalled. Wellness app for influencers, but it's all filters, no foundation. Strategies from your playbook? The real ones. How do you turn chaos into code, keep the kids hooked without the hooks feeling like chains? Ayana's surprise mingled with a surge of sisterly solidarity, the influencer's plea peeling back layers to reveal a woman adrift in her own gloss. Empathy flooded her, softening the edges of old resentments, her hand reaching across to clasp Sloane's, the contact electric with shared seeking. It's listening first, Ayana offered, tone mentor mellow. Not scripting their stories, but co-authoring. Weekly circles where they debug not just apps, but assumptions. Chaos? Harness it as fuel. Let them lead the sprints, own the bugs. Your app could be a portal, Sloane. Not performative, but pivotal. Sloane's eyes widened, notebook emerging from her clutch, scribbles flying as inspiration ignited. Pivotal, yes. Co-authoring. That's the glow-up. You're a force, Ayana. Let's sync calendars. Harlem next month? Laughter threaded the exchange then, tentative ripples swelling to waves. Ronan's quip about Harrington's hacking heartbeats, drawing guffaws. Even Harlan's bark joining the chorus. Genevieve, emboldened, ventured a tale from Beckett's boyhood, her voice lilting with unpracticed warmth. He once merged the neighbor's goldfish pond with our fountain. Disaster, but the glee in his chaos? Pure you, Ayana. Unscripted joy. The rooftop echoed with mirth, the wind's howl softened to an accomplice's hush. Ayana's ribs aching from shared hilarity, the sound a salve to scars long festering. Beckett's laughter rumbled deepest, his arm tightening around her, lips brushing her temple in a kiss laced with liberation. See? He whispered, breath hot against her skin. Your storm cleared ours. I choose you. Fierce, every dawn. Ayana turned into him, their foreheads touching in the golden haze. The moment a microcosm of mending. Love reclaimed, not in grand gestures but granular graces, her heart unfurling like night jasmine at first light. As the evening waned, the party dispersed in a flurry of embraces, Genevieve's hug lingering, fierce and fragrant, Harlan's handshake evolving to shoulder clasp, Sloane's air kiss landing true on cheek, Donovan's nod deepening to, well played, Ronan's bear hug sealing sibling solidarity. The elevator's descent cradled them in velvet quiet, the city below a mosaic of lights pulsing like healed wounds. In the car's shadowed cocoon, Beckett pulled Ayana close, his profile etched in dashboard glow, voice rough with resolve. No more silences, he vowed, fingers interlacing with hers over the gearshift, the sapphire band cool against his warmth. Defend you daily, against them, against me. Boundaries love, dinners quarterly, with exits if the air sours. In your world, mine now. Galas for your grants, board seats for your vision. Ayana searched his eyes, finding the gallery spark reignited, unshadowed by ghosts. Forgive? He pressed, vulnerability cracking his CEO veneer. She cupped his jaw, thumb tracing the line of stubble, tears pricking anew. Not sorrow, but surfeit of soul. We're forging, Beckett, not flawless, but forward. Yes, to us, redefined. Months unfurled like chapters rewritten, the family's thaw deepening into an alliance's thaw. Genevieve attended a Juneteenth workshop, her questions voracious, hands stained with craft inks from youth-led murals. Harlan funneled grants into Ayana's program, his variables now vested in Village Futures. Quarterly check-ins evolving to collaborative codings. Sloan's app pivoted to co-code wellness. Harlem beta tests buzzing with Ayana's mentees, her feeds flooding with unfiltered fire. Donovan Quieter volunteered logistics for mentorship drives, his quips yielding to queries on equity audits. Ronan became a fixture at Loft Sundays, soul records spinning as a bridge between worlds. Ayana channeled the metamorphosis into prose, her blog a beacon, voice as verdict, reclaiming roots in wrecking rooms. Posts pulsing with the power of women who spoke shadows into light, black brilliance unbowed. Readership swelled, invitations cascading, TED stages, policy roundtables, her words rippling like delta rains nourishing parched earth. Yet the truest triumph bloomed domestic. Mornings with Beckett, coffee steaming as they plotted hybrid havens, tech labs in HBCU halls, his algorithms attuned to her ancestries. Nights, tangled in sheets, his defenses a chorus, "You're the empire I build eternal." In quiet retrospection, as autumn waned to winter's hush, Ayana stood at the loft's vast window, skyline sprawling like a canvas she'd co-authored. The voice that shattered silence hadn't just salvaged a marriage. It salvaged her sovereignty, the unassailable truth that worth wasn't woven from wealth's warp, but self's unyielding weft. My roar didn't just echo, she mused, hands splaying over the glass, fogging with breath's promise. It reshaped the room. To those adrift in similar storms, sidelined souls loving across chasms, she penned the coda. Speak, sisters, your thunder remakes worlds. Demand the dawn you deserve. Let no legacy dim your light. The city whispered back, alive with assent, as Ayana turned to Beckett's waiting arms, ready for the next verse in their unbound ballad. If this tale of reckoning and reclaimed fire stirred your soul, whispers of your own battles against the shadows, share below. What voice will you unleash next? Thank you for journeying with Ayana's storm. Until our paths cross again, stay fierce. Get out of this room now! Evelyn's voice sliced through the quiet American home, her eyes blazing with disdain as she confronted Niaza. The stunning black woman, draped in a shimmering turquoise silk nightgown, stood frozen in her bedroom with Ethan, her white husband. Evelyn, her mother-in-law, harbored a deep-seated prejudice, viewing Niaza as an intruder who stole her son from Lana, the white childhood sweetheart who once abandoned Ethan for money. Now Lana returned with a sinister scheme, and Evelyn demanded Niaza yield the marital sanctuary. The clash ignited, unraveling shocking secrets. What drove Lana back? Could Niaza reclaim her place? Tension simmered, promising a tale of betrayal and resilience that grips the soul. The humid Louisiana air clung to the skin as Niaza stepped into the bustling community fair, her heart thrumming with an unfamiliar rhythm. She was a vision, ebony skin glowing under the golden sun, her laughter a melody that turned heads. Amid the chatter and the scent of fried beignets, her gaze locked with Ethan's, a tall white man with kind hazel eyes and a disarming smile. It was a collision of worlds, a spark that ignited something fierce within her. He approached, voice soft yet steady, introducing himself as a local architect volunteering to rebuild homes after the last storm. Niaza, a passionate art therapist, felt her pulse quicken. This wasn't just a meeting, it was destiny clawing its way into her life. Days melted into months, each stolen glance and late-night conversation weaving a bond that felt unbreakable. Ethan's gentle touch, his stories of a childhood shadowed by loss, drew Niaza in deeper. She saw in him a refuge, a man who saw her, not her skin, not her struggles, but her soul. Yet beneath the joy, a tremor of unease lingered. When he first mentioned his mother, Evelyn, his tone shifted, a hint of caution threading through. Niaza brushed it aside, her heart too full of love to heed the warning. Their love blossomed in the vibrant streets of New Orleans, where jazz spilled from every corner. And soon Ethan proposed under a canopy of magnolia trees, his voice trembling with hope. Niaza said yes, tears streaking her cheeks, believing she'd found her forever. The wedding was a kaleidoscope of joy and tension. Niaza wore a gown that hugged her curves, a celebration of her heritage, but Evelyn's eyes narrowed as she approached. The older black woman, regal yet stern, offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're the one," she murmured, her voice laced with something Niaza couldn't name, disapproval, perhaps, or suspicion. The reception buzzed with laughter, but Evelyn's presence loomed, her comments slicing like shards of glass. "Ethan always liked lighter skin," she said once, her tone casual yet cutting, leaving Niaza's chest tight with hurt. She clung to Ethan's hand, his reassuring squeeze a lifeline. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Their new life began in a charming Creole cottage in Baton Rouge, a gift from Ethan's late father's estate. The bedroom they chose was a sanctuary, soft beige walls, a four-poster bed draped with sheer curtains, and windows that framed the swaying oaks outside. Niaza felt a surge of pride as she unpacked her art supplies, envisioning a future painted with love. But Evelyn's shadow crept in. The first visit came unannounced, her knock sharp and impatient. She swept through the house, her critique biting, "This color's too dull," or "You need better curtains." Niaza's stomach churned, a mix of anger and helplessness, but she bit her tongue, wanting peace for Ethan's sake. Then came the name, Lana. Evelyn mentioned her casually over dinner one night, her voice softening. "Ethan's childhood friend, so sweet, so pure," she sighed, her gaze lingering on Niaza. The story unfolded. Lana, a white girl with golden hair and a charming laugh, had grown up next door, their bond unbreakable until she left for Europe 3 years ago, chasing wealth. Evelyn's eyes darkened. "She left because of you," she accused, her words a slap. Niaza's heart sank, confusion warring with indignation. Ethan intervened, his voice firm, but the damage was done. Niaza lay awake that night, the creak of the house echoing her turmoil, wondering if love could withstand such a rift. Evelyn's visits grew frequent, each one a test of Niaza's resolve. She rearranged furniture, criticized Niaza's cooking, and dropped hints about Lana's return. "She's coming back soon," Evelyn said one afternoon, her smile cryptic. Niaza's chest tightened, a storm brewing within. She confided in Ethan, her voice breaking. "She hates me," she whispered, tears welling. He pulled her close, promising to talk to his mother, but his hesitation stung. Niaza felt isolated, her joy eroding under Evelyn's gaze. The bedroom, once a haven, now felt like a battlefield. Every glance from Ethan's mother a silent demand for her to yield. One evening, as jazz floated through the open window, Ethan received a call. His face paled and he turned to Niaza, his voice hesitant. "Lana's back. Mom wants her to visit." Niaza's heart plummeted, a cold dread settling in. She nodded, forcing a smile, but inside fear gnawed. The next day Lana arrived, elegant, pale, and disarmingly polite. Evelyn's face lit up, her arms enveloping the white woman like a long-lost daughter. Niaza watched, her stomach twisting, sensing the ground shifting beneath her. Lana's eyes met hers, a flicker of something, triumph perhaps, sending a shiver down Niaza's spine. The room grew heavy with unspoken tension, and Niaza knew the battle for her home, her love, had just begun. The air in the Baton Rouge cottage thickened with unspoken resentment as Lana's presence lingered, her laughter a discordant note against the soft hum of the ceiling fan. Niaza stood in the kitchen, her turquoise silk nightgown catching the dim light, her beauty a stark contrast to the turmoil churning within. Ethan's assurances echoed hollowly as Lana settled into the guest room, her every move orchestrated by Evelyn's approving nods. The mother-in-law's adoration for the white woman was palpable, her dark eyes gleaming with a possessive pride that excluded Niaza entirely. Each day, the house felt less like a home, the walls closing in as Evelyn's subtle jabs grew bolder. Lana always knew how to brighten a room, she'd muse, her tone dripping with implication, leaving Niaza's heart bruised and her spirit fraying. Niaza tried to hold on to the love that had brought her here, her fingers tracing the edge of the kitchen counter where she and Ethan had once shared late-night dreams. But the weight of Evelyn's disdain pressed harder, a silent accusation that Niaza had stolen Ethan from his rightful past. Lana, with her practiced smiles and tales of European grandeur, wove herself into the fabric of the household, her voice a constant reminder of a history Niaza could never claim. Ethan, torn between his wife and his mother's expectations, offered weak smiles, his hands hesitant when they reached for hers. Niaza's chest ached with a mix of love and betrayal, her trust in him wavering as he failed to confront Evelyn's growing favoritism. The turning point came on a sultry evening, the scent of magnolias drifting through the open windows. Niaza was sketching in the living room, her art a refuge from the tension, when Evelyn's voice cut through the stillness. "She's staying longer," the older woman declared, her gaze fixed on Lana, who lounged on the sofa with an air of entitlement. Niaza's pencil froze, her heart lurching. "Longer?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of dread and defiance. Evelyn's lips curled into a thin smile. "Yes, she needs stability. You wouldn't understand." The word stung, a direct assault on Niaza's place in this family. She clenched her fists, the paper crumpling under her grip, her mind racing with the injustice of it all. That night, as she lay beside Ethan, the four-poster bed a battleground of emotions, Niaza's thoughts spiraled. She could hear Lana's soft laughter from down the hall, a sound that twisted the knife of insecurity deeper. Ethan's breathing was uneven, his silence a wall between them. "We need to set boundaries," Niaza whispered, her voice raw with suppressed tears. He turned to her, his eyes shadowed with guilt. "I'll talk to Mom," he promised, but the lack of conviction in his tone left her cold. She pressed her face into the pillow, the silk of her nightgown cool against her skin, willing herself to find the strength amid the encroaching darkness. The next morning, the tension escalated. Evelyn arrived unannounced, her presence a storm cloud over the breakfast table. Lana trailed behind, her white blouse pristine, a stark contrast to Niaza's rumpled elegance. "We need to discuss arrangements," Evelyn announced, her tone brooking no argument. Niaza's stomach dropped as the older woman's eyes swept the room, landing on the bedroom door. "Lana needs a proper space," she continued, her voice hardening. "That room, your room, would suit her." Niaza's breath caught, a surge of anger and disbelief flooding her veins. "My room?" she echoed, her voice rising. Evelyn nodded, unflinching. "You can manage elsewhere. Lana's been through enough." The words hit like a physical blow, Niaza's heart pounding with a mix of rage and humiliation. She glanced at Ethan, searching for support, but he stared at his plate, his jaw tight. The betrayal cut deeper than Evelyn's words, a silent acknowledgement that her husband might not fight for her. "This is my home," Niaza said, her voice steady despite the storm within. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her lips parting to retort, but the moment hung heavy, charged with the promise of a confrontation that would redefine their lives. Niaza's mind raced, her beauty a mask for the fire igniting inside, ready to challenge the forces threatening to unravel her world. As the day wore on, Niaza retreated to the bedroom, her sanctuary now a battleground. She stood by the window, the turquoise silk clinging to her form, her reflection in the glass a warrior's resolve. The sound of Lana's voice drifted up, sweet and manipulative, weaving a web around Evelyn. Niaza's chest tightened, a blend of fear and determination. She knew this was more than a room. It was her identity, her love, her right to belong. The creak of the floorboards signaled Ethan's approach. his footsteps hesitant. She turned, her eyes meeting his, a silent plea and a fierce demand for allegiance. The stage was set, and Niaza braced herself for the war to come, her spirit unyielding against the tide of prejudice and deceit. The silence shattered as Ethan crossed the threshold, his footsteps echoing Niaza's racing heartbeat. She turned from the window, her turquoise silk nightgown whispering against her skin, her dark eyes blazing with a vulnerability she rarely showed. Ethan's face, usually so open, was etched with conflict, his white skin flushed, his hazel eyes avoiding hers. "We need to talk," he murmured, closing the door behind him, the click of finality that made Niaza's stomach twist. She wanted to scream, to demand why he hadn't defended her at breakfast, but instead she crossed her arms, a shield against the hurt flooding her chest. "Talk? Or make excuses for your mother?" Her voice cracked, laced with the pain of feeling like an outsider in her own marriage. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair, his posture slumping with guilt. She's protective. Lana's going through a tough time abroad. Debts, bad choices. Mom thinks helping her will fix things." Niaza's laughter was bitter, a sound that cut through the room like glass. "Protective? She's erasing me, Ethan. Every look, every word. It's like I'm the villain who stole you from Lana." The name hung between them, heavy with history. Ethan stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers, but she pulled away, the rejection stinging them both. His touch, once her anchor, now felt like a reminder of divided loyalties. Deep down, Niaza feared he still harbored echoes of his past with Lana, the white girl who fit Evelyn's ideal. The days blurred into a haze of unease as Lana's temporary stay stretched, her presence a constant erosion of Niaza's peace. Lana moved through the house with effortless grace, her golden hair catching the light, her stories of Parisian nights enchanting Evelyn. Niaza watched from the shadows, her heart aching as the older woman laughed at Lana's jokes, her dark features softening in a way they never did for her daughter-in-law. "You're like the daughter I always wanted," Evelyn cooed one afternoon in the kitchen, handing Lana a cup of tea. Niaza, chopping vegetables nearby, felt a sharp pang, jealousy mixed with sorrow. Why couldn't Evelyn see her strength, her love for Ethan? Instead, she was reduced to an intruder, her ebony beauty a threat rather than a gift. Lana's intrusion deepened subtly at first. She borrowed Niaza's lotions without asking, her fingers lingering on the bottles as if claiming territory. Then came the rearrangements. The living room pillows fluffed differently, the bookshelf reordered to favor Lana's borrowed novels. Niaza discovered it one evening, her art supplies pushed aside for Lana's sketch pad, a blatant overstep that ignited fury in her veins. "This is my space," she whispered to herself, her hands trembling as she restored order. But the violation lingered, a knot of resentment tightening in her chest. She confronted Ethan that night, her voice low and fierce. "She's not just staying, she's taking over." He nodded, his eyes filled with remorse, but his promise to address it felt fragile, like a thread ready to snap. Evelyn's support for Lana grew unabashed, her visits now daily rituals of indulgence. She'd bring groceries tailored to Lana's tastes, imported cheeses, fine wines, ignoring Niaza's preferences. "Lana needs comfort after all she's endured," Evelyn explained once, her tone dismissive as she glanced at Niaza. The implication burned. Niaza's comfort was secondary. Hurt morphed into anger, fueling Niaza's quiet observations. She noticed Lana's furtive phone calls, her whispers laced with urgency, but dismissed them as paranoia. Yet the unease gnawed, a premonition that something darker lurked beneath Lana's polished facade. The hints about the bedroom began innocuously, Evelyn's comments slipping in like poison. "That room's so cozy, perfect for someone needing rest," she'd say, her eyes flicking toward the master suite during a tour of the house. Niaza's blood ran cold each time, her mind reeling at the audacity. Was this Evelyn's plan? To displace her entirely? The thought twisted her insides, a blend of fear and defiance. She confided in a friend over coffee one day, her voice breaking. "It's like I'm invisible." The empathy in her friend's eyes offered solace, but back home, the isolation deepened. Ethan tried to bridge the gap, his arms around her at night a tentative peace, But Niaza's trust frayed, her love shadowed by doubt. One humid afternoon, as thunder rumbled outside, Niaza overheard a snippet that chilled her soul. Lana in the guest room murmured into her phone, "Just a little longer. Evelyn's eating out of my hand." Niaza froze in the hallway, her heart pounding, the words a revelation of deceit. Was Lana playing them all? The suspicion ignited a fire within, her beauty masking a resolve hardening like steel. She retreated to the bedroom, the four-poster bed a temporary fortress, her mind plotting how to unravel the web. Ethan entered later, sensing her turmoil, his concern genuine yet insufficient. "What's wrong?" he asked, his hand on her shoulder. Niaza met his gaze, her eyes stormy. "Everything," she replied, the word heavy with the weight of impending confrontation. The foundation of their life cracked further, setting the stage for the storm to break. The storm broke not with thunder, but with the sharp twist of a key in the lock, the front door yielding to Evelyn's uninvited entry late that evening. Niaza, still reeling from her exchange with Ethan, had retreated to the bedroom, the turquoise silk of her nightgown a fragile armor against the vulnerability clawing at her insides. She paced the Persian rug, her bare feet silent on the woven threads, her mind a whirlwind of doubt and resolve. Ethan's everything lingered like a ghost, his admission a crack in the facade of their union that threatened to swallow her whole. Love, she realized with a bitter ache, was not enough if it came laced with such conditional loyalty. Down the hall, voices murmured, Evelyn's low timbre mingling with Lana's lilting cadence, a duet of familiarity that excluded Niaza entirely. She froze, her heart slamming against her ribs, as footsteps approached. The bedroom door swung open without a knock, Evelyn filling the frame like a sentinel of judgment. Her dark eyes, sharp as obsidian, swept over Niaza, taking in the disheveled curls framing her face, the defiant set of her shoulders. Lana hovered behind, her pale features illuminated by the hallway light, a ghost from Ethan's past now manifesting in flesh and ambition. "We need to settle this," Evelyn declared, her voice a whip crack in the intimate space, stepping inside as if she owned the very air. Niaza's breath hitched, a surge of indignation flooding her veins, hot and unyielding. This was her sanctuary, the bed where she'd whispered vows to Ethan, the nightstand holding her grandmother's locket, a talisman of roots Evelyn dismissed. "Settle what?" she demanded, her tone edged with steel, though her hands trembled at her sides. Evelyn's lips thinned, her posture unbowed by age or propriety. "The room. Lana needs it. Proper rest, stability, things you've taken for granted." The words landed like blows, each one stripping away layers of Niaza's hard-won security. Lana shifted, her eyes downcast in feigned humility, but Niaza caught the glint of satisfaction, a predator's gleam that twisted her gut. "You can't be serious," Niaza whispered, her voice breaking on the edge of disbelief, tears pricking her eyes not from weakness, but from the raw injustice of it all. Evelyn advanced, her presence suffocating, the scent of her lavender perfume cloying. "Deadly serious. You've had your time here playing house. Lana's family. Real family. She deserves this." The prejudice hung explicit now, Evelyn's gaze raking over Niaza's form as if her blackness were a stain on the pristine sheets. Niaza's chest heaved, a storm of emotions crashing, humiliation at being reduced to an interloper, fury at the erasure of her marriage, and a deep, aching sorrow for the love Ethan professed, yet failed to shield. "This is my home," she retorted, her voice rising, laced with the fire of generations who had fought for less. "My bed, my life with Ethan. You don't get to decide." Lana's hand fluttered to her throat, a theatrical gasp escaping her lips. "I don't want to cause trouble," she murmured, her voice honeyed poison, but Evelyn silenced her with a wave, her focus locked on Niaza like a hunter sighting prey. "Trouble? You're the trouble. Sliding in where you don't belong, turning my son against his own blood." The accusation pierced deep, evoking ghosts of Niaza's own battles against judgment, the subtle racisms she'd endured long before this marriage. Her skin flushed hot, not with shame, but with a burgeoning rage that steadied her stance. She stepped forward, closing the distance, her beauty fierce in the lamplight. eyes locking with Evelyn's in unyielding challenge. Before Evelyn could retort, a muffled vibration cut the tension. Lana's phone slipped from her pocket onto the dresser. The screen lit up, illuminating a name. Darling, Paris. Lana lunged for it, but Niaza was faster, snatching it with a swiftness born of instinct. "Give that back," Lana hissed, her composure cracking, revealing the desperation beneath. Niaza held it aloft, her thumb hovering over the answer button, heart pounding with a mix of trepidation and triumph. The call connected, a man's voice crackling through the speaker. Thick French accent laced with urgency. "Lana chérie, the debts are piling. Evelyn's jewelry, have you secured it yet? We need the cash to vanish before they trace us." The room plunged into stunned silence, the words a thunderclap shattering the facade. Niaza's eyes widened, the phone trembling in her grip as the full horror unfolded. Lana's return not born of remorse, but predation. Evelyn's face drained of color, her stern mask fracturing into confusion, then dawning betrayal. "What? What is this?" she stammered, her voice a fragile thread, stepping back as if struck. Lana's eyes darted wildly, her pale cheeks flushing crimson. "It's nothing. Lies. She's twisting it." But the man's voice persisted, oblivious. "Remember, play the heartbroken card. Get the safes combination tonight." Niaza's mind reeled, the pieces slotting into place with sickening clarity. The borrowed lotions, a ploy for access, the rearranged shelves, a scout's reconnaissance, Evelyn's favoritism, a manipulated lever. Betrayal surged anew, not just from Lana's deceit, but from the older woman's blindness to it, her prejudice blinding her to the wolf at her door. "You used her," Niaza accused Lana, her voice low and venomous, thrusting the phone forward like evidence in a trial. "All this, the tears, the stories, to bleed her dry for your gambling debts?" Lana snatched the device, ending the call with frantic swipes, but the damage was irrevocable, her mask in tatters. Evelyn clutched the bedpost, her knuckles whitening, a gasp escaping as the truth clawed its way in. For the first time, vulnerability cracked her armor, eyes glistening with the sting of exploitation, the realization that her cherished daughter had preyed on her loneliness. Niaza watched, her own anger softening into a reluctant pity, the shared wound of deception bridging the chasm between them, if only for a heartbeat. "Get out," Evelyn whispered finally, her voice hoarse, directed at Lana but echoing for them all. The white woman backed away, tears real now, born of exposure rather than sorrow. "Evelyn, please, I didn't mean—" But the door slammed behind her retreat, leaving the room a battlefield strewn with shattered illusions. Niaza stood amid the wreckage, her nightgown a sapphire veil over her trembling form, the weight of victory bittersweet. Ethan's absence amplified the isolation, but in this moment she felt a spark of empowerment. Her voice, her vigilance, had unmasked the shadows. Evelyn met her gaze, the air thick with unspoken apology, the first fracture in their enmity. Yet as silence settled, Niaza wondered if mending could follow such a rift, her heart a tempest of relief and unresolved ache, bracing for the fallout that would test every bond she held dear. The echo of the slammed door reverberated through the cottage like a final judgment, leaving Niaza and Evelyn in a vacuum of stunned quiet. Niaza's hand still clutched the phone, its screen dark now, but the incriminating words burned in her mind, a litany of greed that exposed the fragility of trust. Her turquoise silk nightgown felt suddenly too thin, a whisper of vulnerability against the chill of revelation. Evelyn staggered back against the dresser, her face a mask of crumbling certainty, eyes wide, lips parted in a silent gasp, the regal poise that had defined her fracturing into raw, unguarded shock. For the first time, Niaza saw not the adversary, but a woman adrift, her world upended by the very hand she'd cradled. You heard wrong," Evelyn stammered, her voice a threadbare defense, clutching the edge of the bed as if it could anchor her. But the tremor in her dark hands betrayed her, the knuckles paling against her ebony skin. Niaza's heart twisted, a cocktail of vindication and unexpected sorrow surging through her. She'd longed for this moment, to shatter Evelyn's pedestal of prejudice, yet witnessing the older woman's unraveling stirred an unwelcome empathy. Evelyn, who had wielded disdain like a weapon, now looked small, her breath coming in shallow bursts, the weight of betrayal etching lines deeper into her face. "No, Evelyn," Niaza said softly, her tone laced with steel wrapped in compassion, stepping closer despite the urge to flee. "I heard everything. Lana's not here for healing. She's here to rob you blind. The jewelry, the safe, it's all a con to pay off her debts." Evelyn's eyes flashed with denial, a spark of fury igniting amid the hurt. "Lies, she's family. My son's first love, pure as the day she left." But the words faltered, her gaze darting to the door where Lana had vanished, the ghost of affection curdling into doubt. Niaza pressed the phone into Evelyn's palm, her fingers brushing the older woman's in a gesture that bridged their chasm, if only fleetingly. "Listen for yourself. I recorded the tail end when she didn't hang up fast enough." Evelyn's hand shook as she fumbled with the device, the speaker crackling to life with Lana's frantic whispers, echoing the Frenchman's demands. Each syllable was a dagger. "Evelyn's naive. She'll hand it over." Twisting deeper, Evelyn's face contorting from disbelief to devastation. A sob escaped her, raw and unbidden, her body sagging onto the bed's edge, shoulders heaving with the force of suppressed grief. Niaza knelt before her, the silk pooling around her knees, her own eyes stinging with unshed tears. In this vulnerable tableau, the barriers of race and resentment thinned. Niaza saw the woman beneath, the widow who'd poured her hopes into Lana's return, blind to the viper's coil. "She played you," Niaza murmured, her voice gentle yet unyielding, reaching out to steady Evelyn's trembling arm. The touch was electric, a tentative olive branch amid the ruins. Evelyn recoiled at first, her pride a reflex, but then her hand covered Niaza's, gripping with desperate need. "Why didn't I see?" she whispered, tears carving paths down her cheeks, her voice breaking on the edge of a lifetime's regrets. The admission hung heavy, a confession that peeled back layers of Evelyn's armor, revealing the fear of loneliness that had fueled her bias against Niaza all along. The front door burst open downstairs, Ethan's voice calling out, "Niaza, Mom!" His footsteps pounding up the stairs like an approaching gale. Niaza rose, her heart leaping with a mix of relief and apprehension, smoothing her nightgown as if composure could mend the fractures ahead. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his white skin ashen under the hallway light, hazel eyes widening at the scene, his mother weeping on the bed, his wife standing resolute beside her. "What the hell happened?" he demanded, crossing the room in 2 strides, his concern a torrent that washed over Niaza first, his hand finding her waist in instinctive protection. For the first time that night, warmth bloomed in her chest, his touch a reaffirmation that chased the shadows of doubt. Niaza met his gaze, her voice steady despite the emotional tempest. "Lana's a fraud, Ethan. She's been using your mom, us, to fund her escape from debts." She recounted the call, the plot, her words precise and unflinching, each detail drawing Ethan's face from confusion to horror. Evelyn nodded weakly, the phone extended like damning evidence, her sobs quieting into hiccuping breaths. Ethan's jaw clenched, a storm of betrayal darkening his features as he replayed the fragments in his mind. The subtle manipulations he'd overlooked for peace's sake. "That bitch," he growled, the profanity foreign on his lips, his free hand balling into a fist. He turned to his mother, kneeling to envelop her in a hug, his voice softening to a murmur of comfort. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have seen it too." But anger resurfaced as he pulled back, his eyes hardening. "Where is she now?" Evelyn gestured vaguely toward the stairs, her composure fracturing anew. Ethan stormed out, his shouts echoing, "Lana, get down here!" Niaza following at a measured pace, her pulse thundering with anticipation. In the living room, Lana stood frozen, her pale face streaked with mascara, suitcase half-packed at her feet. "Ethan, it's not," she began, her voice a practiced plea. But he cut her off, thrusting the phone forward. "Save it. We know everything. Get out, now." The finality in his tone brooked no mercy, his stance a wall between her and the life she'd infiltrated. Lana's eyes darted to Evelyn, seeking salvation, but the older woman's gaze was ice, her silence a condemnation deeper than words. Defeated, Lana snatched her bag, her heels clicking a hasty retreat toward the door, the night swallowing her like the debts she fled. Ethan slammed it shut behind her, the sound a cathartic punctuation, his chest heaving with released fury. He turned to Nyaza, pulling her into his arms, his embrace fierce and apologetic. "I should have protected you from all of this," he whispered into her curls, his voice thick with regret, the warmth of his body a balm against her lingering chill. Nyaza melted into him, tears finally spilling, a release of the isolation she'd endured. Yet as Evelyn shuffled into the room, her eyes downcast, the victory felt incomplete, a fragile truce demanding reckoning. Evelyn extended her hand, the house key glinting in her palm, her fingers unsteady. "Take it," she said hoarsely, the gesture laden with surrender, her pride yielding to the truth's unsparing light. Nyaza accepted it, the metal cool against her skin, a symbol of reclaimed boundaries. Evelyn's eyes met hers, glistening with a nascent respect, the first crack in the wall of prejudice. I was wrong about you," she admitted, the words costing her dearly, her voice a whisper of atonement. Nyaza nodded, her heart swelling with cautious hope, the shared betrayal forging an uneasy alliance. As Ethan drew them both into a tentative circle, the cottage exhaled, the air lighter but charged with the promise of healing's arduous path. Nyaza leaned into her husband, the silk of her gown a testament to her enduring grace, knowing the scars would linger, but the dawn of understanding had broken. The key's weight in Nyaza's palm felt like a talisman of fragile peace, its edges biting into her skin as Ethan drew her closer, his arms a tentative fortress against the night's wreckage. Evelyn lingered in the doorway, her silhouette a shadow of defeat, her dark eyes hollowed by the betrayal that had stripped her bare. The cottage, once a haven of whispered promises, now hummed with the residue of shattered illusions. Lana's hurried footsteps, a fading echo, the air thick with the scent of spilled tea and unspoken recriminations. Nyaza leaned into Ethan, her turquoise silk nightgown a cool veil over the heat of her turmoil, but even his embrace couldn't fully staunch the bleed of doubt seeping into her heart. Trust, she realized with a pang that twisted like a knife, was a fragile mosaic, cracked irreparably by the fissures of neglect and favoritism. Dawn crept in reluctantly, painting the living room in muted grays as the three of them sat in uneasy vigil. Ethan paced, his white skin taut over knuckles white from clenching, his hazel eyes stormy with a rage that mirrored Nyaza's inner tempest. "We can't let her get away with this," he growled, his voice rough from lack of sleep, slamming his fist on the coffee table. The thud reverberated, jolting Evelyn from her stupor on the armchair, her hands wringing a handkerchief into knots. Nyaza watched her mother-in-law, a swell of conflicted pity rising in her chest. The woman who'd wielded prejudice like a shield now huddled, exposed and adrift, her ebony features etched with lines of regret that age hadn't yet drawn. "The police," Nyaza suggested quietly, her voice steady despite the exhaustion weighing her limbs. "We report the scam. Get a restraining order. She won't touch your things, Evelyn." Evelyn's head snapped up, her gaze locking on Nyaza with a mix of gratitude and shame, the first unguarded vulnerability passing between them like a bridge over abyss. "My things. God, I was such a fool," she whispered, her voice cracking, tears tracing fresh paths down her cheeks. The admission hung raw, Evelyn's pride crumbling further as she recounted fragments. Lana's subtle probes about the safe's location, the innocent questions about heirloom jewelry passed down from her own mother. Each revelation deepened the chasm of her isolation, Evelyn's world shrinking to this room, her son's wife the unlikely anchor. Nyaza reached out, her hand hovering before settling on Evelyn's knee, the touch electric with newfound solidarity. "You weren't a fool. You were hopeful," Nyaza said softly, her own heart aching with the echo of her own blindsides, the pain of loving despite the barbs. Evelyn covered her hand, squeezing with desperate fervor, a silent plea for forgiveness that Niaza offered with a nod, the gesture mending a thread in the frayed tapestry of their bond. By midday, the police station loomed, a sterile fortress of fluorescent lights and echoing voices in downtown Baton Rouge. Ethan gripped Niaza's hand as they filed the report, his fingers interlaced with hers, a lifeline amid the bureaucratic chill. The officer, a no-nonsense woman with a badge gleaming like judgment, took their statements with clinical efficiency. Lana's fabricated tales, the recorded call, Evelyn's coerced trust. "We'll issue a warrant for fraud and attempted theft," she assured, her pen scratching notes that sealed Lana's fate. As they emerged into the humid air, Ethan pulled Niaza aside, his face crumpling with the weight of his failures. "I let it go too far. Mom's bias, Lana's games. I should have fought harder for you." His voice broke, hazel eyes glistening, the confession a floodgate releasing months of suppressed guilt. Niaza's throat tightened, love warring with the scar of his hesitations, her beauty a mask for the storm raging within. "You did in the end," she murmured, but the words tasted bittersweet. The rift between them a chasm widened by every overlooked slight. Back home the cottage felt haunted. Lana's ghost in every rearranged drawer, every lingering perfume. Evelyn retreated to her own apartment across town, her departure a quiet unraveling, packing bags with mechanical precision, her eyes avoiding Niaza's, as if the shame burned too bright. "I'll call," she promised at the door, her voice a fragile whisper, the key's absence on her ring a stark emblem of boundaries reclaimed. Niaza hugged her impulsively, the embrace stiff at first, then softening into mutual solace. Evelyn's sobs muffled against her shoulder. "Take care of my boy," Evelyn pleaded, pulling back with eyes brimming, the plea laced with a mother's fear and a dawning respect for the woman she'd wronged. As the door clicked shut, Niaza sagged against it, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave, the victory hollow without the wholeness it promised. That night, the fracture in their marriage surfaced fully, the bedroom a confessional under the moon's pale gaze. Ethan sat on the bed's edge, head in hands, while Niaza stood by the window, her nightgown a sapphire shroud over her weary form. "I love you," he began, his voice raw, "but I see it now, how Mom's poison seeped in, how I let it taint us." Niaza turned, tears spilling unchecked, her heart a battlefield of devotion and disillusion. "It wasn't just her, Ethan. You chose silence too many times. I felt replaceable." The truth landed like a blow, Ethan's face contorting in agony, his hands reaching for her only to fall short. They talked until the stars faded, dissecting the barbs, the biases, the unspoken wounds that had festered. By dawn, the decision crystallized, painful yet necessary. A temporary separation, space to breathe, to rebuild without the shadow of deceit. Niaza packed a single bag, her movements deliberate, each fold of clothing a severance from the life they'd woven. Ethan's eyes tracked her, filled with a desperation that mirrored her own inner turmoil, the fear of loss clashing with the need for clarity. "A month," he proposed, his voice hoarse, sealing it with a kiss that tasted of salt and longing. She nodded, the agreement a balm and a blade, her ebony skin flushed with the resolve of self-preservation. As she drove to her sister's in the Garden District, the rearview mirror framed the cottage shrinking, Evelyn's isolation a parallel echo in her mind. The older woman's solitude a mirror to Niaza's own, both women forging paths through the rubble of misplaced trust. In the days that followed, Evelyn's calls came tentatively at first, then with a hunger for connection. "I replay it all," she'd confess over the phone, her voice steadier, laced with introspection. "How I pushed you away, saw threats where there was only love." Niaza listened, her heart softening at the vulnerability, Evelyn's prejudice peeling away layer by layer, replaced by a tentative admiration for the daughter-in-law, who'd unmasked her folly. "You're stronger than I ever gave you credit," Evelyn admitted one evening, the words a bridge across their divide, fostering a fragile kinship born of shared scars. Meanwhile, news of Lana's pursuit trickled in. The warrant served, her frantic flight to the airport thwarted, cuffs clicking in a Baton Rouge holding cell. Justice, cold and inexorable, offered scant comfort to Nyaza's aching soul, but it affirmed her vigilance, a quiet triumph amid the separation's sting. Alone in her sister's guest room, Nyaza traced the locket at her throat, the turquoise silk folded away, but its memory a talisman of resilience. The separation loomed like a void, Ethan's absence a hollow in her chest, yet in the quiet, she glimpsed clarity, space to reclaim her voice, to heal the wounds of erasure. Evelyn's evolving remorse whispered of redemption's possibility, a slow thaw in the ice of enmity. As rain pattered against the window, Nyaza closed her eyes, the storm within quieting to a determined hum, bracing for the reckoning that would either mend or sever the threads of her fractured world. The rain's relentless patter against the Garden District window mirrored the steady drip of Nyaza's resolve, each drop a reminder that solitude could be a forge for strength. Her sister's guest room, with its faded floral wallpaper and the faint scent of jasmine from the courtyard below, offered a cocoon of quiet where Nyaza could unravel the knots of betrayal without the weight of expectant eyes. Days bled into one another, marked by the rhythm of her art therapy sessions, guiding clients through canvases of chaos toward clarity, while her own sketchpad lay barren, a blank expanse echoing the void Ethan left. She missed him fiercely, the curve of his smile, the way his fingers traced lazy patterns on her skin, but the ache was laced with a sharp clarity. Separation wasn't punishment, but purification, a chance to reclaim the woman Evelyn's shadows had dimmed. Evelyn's calls evolved from tentative check-ins to lifelines of confession, her voice over the line a gravelly whisper stripped of its former barbs. "I sit here staring at the safe, she'd say one afternoon, the Baton Rouge humidity seeping through even the phone's static. All those pieces from Mama, sapphires from her wedding, the gold locket with Daddy's photo. Lana could have taken them, and I'd have let her, blind as a fool." Nyaza listened from her sister's porch swing, the wicker creaking under her, her turquoise nightgown traded for loose linens that breathed with the Delta breeze. Evelyn's vulnerability was a revelation, the older woman's pride yielding to admissions that peeled back decades of guarded heart. "I pushed you away because you reminded me of my own fears, of losing Ethan to someone who wouldn't understand our world. But you saved me from worse." The words hung, heavy with the unsaid apology, and Nyaza's throat tightened, forgiveness blooming tentative in her chest, like night blooming Sirius under moonlight. Nyaza's days filled with deliberate reinvention, morning runs along the Mississippi, the river's muddy churn a metaphor for her churning soul, afternoons lost in charcoal strokes that captured the raw edges of hurt, her ebony hands smudged with the evidence of creation. Her career flourished in the isolation. A new client, a young black artist grappling with identity, mirroring fragments of her own fractured self. "Draw the anger," Nyaza urged during their session, her voice steady, guiding the woman's brush through storms of color. In those moments, empowerment surged, a quiet fire that warmed the chill of Ethan's absence. Yet nights brought the ghosts, dreams of the cottage's four-poster bed, Ethan's breath warm on her neck, shattered by Evelyn's accusatory glare. She'd wake gasping, the locket at her throat a cool anchor, whispering of ancestors who'd endured worse divides. Ethan's messages arrived like hesitant olive branches, texts laced with longing, photos of the cottage's garden where magnolias drooped in sympathy. "Miss your laugh filling these walls," one read, followed by a voice note, his hazel eyes shadowed in the video, voice cracking on her name. Nyaza's heart clenched, love's embers flaring against the separation's frost. But she replied measuredly, each word a step toward balance. "Healing takes time," she'd type, her fingers pausing over send, the admission a mirror to her own tentative mending. He suggested counseling, his plea raw. "I want us whole, Nyaza. No more shadows." The idea took root, a seed of hope amid the thorns, and she agreed, booking sessions at a neutral French Quarter office where wrought iron balconies framed their fragile reunions. The first therapy hour was a crucible, the counselor's neutral space a confessional under soft lamplight. Ethan arrived early, his white button-down rumpled, hazel eyes searching hers with a desperation that mirrored her inner storm. Nyaza entered last, her curls tamed into a crown, her presence a quiet command of the room. They sat across from each other, the counselor's voice a gentle prod. "Speak your truths." Ethan went first, his words tumbling like floodwaters. Regrets for silenced defenses, for letting Evelyn's bias echo unchecked in their home. "I saw you shrinking, and I froze," he confessed, tears carving paths down his cheeks, his hands extended in supplication. Niaza's chest ached, the pain fresh yet cathartic, her own voice emerging steady. "You made me question if our love was enough against the tide. I needed you as my shield, not my echo." The admission bridged them, tentative touches, fingertips brushing, rekindling sparks long dimmed. Evelyn's transformation paralleled their own, her weekly calls evolving into invitations, lunches at a riverside cafe where crawfish boils steamed between them. The older woman arrived with poise regained, but her eyes held a softened light, her dark hands steady as she passed the étouffée. "I enrolled in a class on family dynamics," she'd share, her voice laced with wry humor, the confession a balm to Niaza's lingering scars. "Turns out prejudice isn't inherited, it's chosen, and I'm unchoosing it." Laughter bubbled between them, genuine and light. Evelyn's anecdotes of youth, growing up in the Ninth Ward, fighting for dignity amid Jim Crow's remnants, drawing parallels to Niaza's own lineage. In those shared stories, enmity dissolved, replaced by a kinship forged in fire. Evelyn's respect manifesting in small gestures. A necklace unearthed from the safe, its pearls gleaming like absolution. "For the woman who guarded my legacy," she said, fastening it around Niaza's neck, the cool beads a weight of acceptance that brought tears to both. Lana's downfall threaded through their healing like a cautionary refrain. The news clipping Ethan forwarded. "Heiress scammer nabbed at airport, her pale face mugshot stark, debts exposed in lurid detail." Evelyn read it aloud during one call, her voice steady with closure. "She'll pay, but I've already lost enough." The justice was cold comfort, but it affirmed Niaza's instincts, a validation that steadied her step. As weeks waned, the separation's edges softened. Ethan's visits to her sisters became rituals. Walks under live oaks draped in Spanish moss, hands entwined, conversations delving deeper into dreams deferred. "I want to build with you, not just beside you," he vowed one twilight, his lips brushing her temple, the promise of vow renewed. Niaza returned to the cottage on a sun-drenched morning, the door opening to Ethan's embrace, the four-poster bed waiting like a reclaimed throne. Evelyn arrived later, bearing gumbo in a cast-iron pot, her smile tentative yet warm. "Homecomings deserve spice," she quipped, setting the table with deliberate care, the three of them orbiting a meal that tasted of reconciliation. Laughter flowed freer, Evelyn's stories now inclusive, drawing Niaza in as kin. As night fell, Ethan and Niaza retreated to their sanctuary, the silk sheets a canvas for rediscovery, his hands mapping her curves with reverence, her sighs a symphony of mended trust. In his arms, Niaza felt whole, the turquoise nightgown folded away, but its essence woven into her skin. Resilient, radiant, unyielding. Yet healing's path wound onward. Evelyn's growth a mirror to their own, her apologies evolving into advocacy, volunteering at Niaza's art center, her presence a quiet force against the biases she'd once embodied. The cottage breathed anew, walls echoing not with division, but harmony's tentative song. Niaza traced the pearls at her throat, the locket beside it a dual talisman, her heart swelling with the quiet triumph of bonds reforged. Love, she understood now, wasn't absence of storm, but dancing through it, together, unbroken. The magnolias in the cottage garden had shed their petals by the time Niaza and Ethan's renewed vows echoed softly in the backyard. A private ceremony under the Louisiana sun, petals carpeting the grass like confetti from a healed wound. Evelyn stood witness, her dark eyes misty with a pride no longer shadowed by doubt, her hand clasped in Niaza's as the officiant pronounced them bound anew. The turquoise silk nightgown, now a cherished relic folded in lavender-scented tissue, symbolized the resilience that had carried them through. Niaza slipping into a flowing sundress of emerald green, her ebony skin radiant, curls crowned with fresh blooms. Ethan's hand trembled as he slid the ring back on her finger, his hazel eyes locking with hers in a gaze that promised vigilance. The white gold band etched with their initials, a testament to battles won and scars honored. Life wove forward in rhythms reclaimed, the cottage no longer a stage for intrusion, but a symphony of shared silences and laughter's crescendo. Mornings began with Ethan's coffee brewing, the aroma mingling with Niaza's charcoal sketches spread across the kitchen table, portraits of clients' triumphs, her art therapy practice blooming into a community beacon. Evelyn's visits, once tempests, now arrived with the chime of a texted heads up, bearing baskets of pralines or stories from her volunteer shifts at the center. "Look what your girl inspired," she'd say, unfolding a young artist's canvas, vibrant strokes of self-discovery that mirrored Niaza's own journey. The older woman's transformation was profound, her once stern features softened by lines of genuine joy, her apologies long since evolved into actions. Hosting potlucks where she championed Niaza's heritage dishes, her voice rising in defense against any whisper of bias in their circle. Lana's shadow faded to a footnote in tabloid footnotes, her trial a swift reckoning in a New Orleans courtroom where the judge's gavel fell like final punctuation. "Attempted grand larceny and fraud," the headlines blared, her pale face gaunt in custody photos, debts unraveled thread by thread. Evelyn attended the sentencing alone, emerging with a quiet closure, her report to Niaza over iced tea terse yet freeing. 2 years restitution. She's gone, for good. The news elicited no triumph in Niaza, only a somber nod, the justice a mirror to her own unmasking of deceit. Ethan wrapped an arm around her waist as Evelyn spoke, his touch a steady anchor, the three of them orbiting a table laden with beignets, the sweetness a counterpoint to bitterness past. Niaza's strength deepened in the afterglow, her sessions with the counselor now joint rituals, Ethan's hand in hers as they dissected lingering doubts, his confessions evolving from guilt to gratitude. "You taught me to see," he'd murmur post-session, driving home through the quarter's narrow streets, jazz spilling from open doorways like anthems to their rebirth. Their nights in the four-poster bed reignited with deliberate tenderness, his lips tracing the curve of her neck, her fingers weaving through his hair, the silk sheets whispering approvals of rediscovery. Intimacy rebuilt brick by brick, each caress a vow against the fractures, Niaza's body arching in trust renewed, her moans a melody of reclamation. "You're my home," Ethan breathed against her skin, the words sealing the sanctuary they'd fought to preserve. Evelyn's kinship blossomed unexpectedly, her invitations pulling Niaza into corners of her world long barred. Sundays at the Ninth Ward Market, where the older woman bartered for okra with vendors who'd known her youth, her arm linking Niaza's in easy camaraderie. "Mama would have loved you," Evelyn confided one humid afternoon, fanning herself with a palmetto leaf, her voice thick with ancestral echo. The revelation bridged generations, Evelyn sharing tales of her grandmother's civil rights marches, parallels drawn to Niaza's own unyielding spirit. In return, Niaza opened her sketchbook, charcoal portraits capturing Evelyn's laugh lines, the older woman tearing up at the gift. "You've given me back my reflection." The bond forged in Fire's Forge proved unbreakable, Evelyn's advocacy a quiet revolution, donating to anti-bias workshops, her presence at Niaza's center, a beacon for women navigating similar storms. Challenges lingered, subtle as Delta fog. Evelyn's occasional slips into old habits, a hesitant comment on traditional ways, quickly retracted with a self-deprecating chuckle. Ethan's overprotectiveness, born of fear's residue, gently navigated in their talks. Yet these were threads in a richer weave, strengthening the fabric rather than fraying it. Niaza's locket and pearls, twin talismans at her throat, jingled softly during her runs, a rhythm syncing with her heartbeat's steady cadence. Her practice expanded, a mural project in the community center blooming under her guidance. Walls alive with stories of Black women rising, Evelyn's volunteer brushstrokes adding strokes of solidarity. One balmy evening, as fireflies danced in the garden, the trio gathered for a ritual of their own. Evelyn's gumbo simmering, Ethan's playlist of Zydeco filling the air. Laughter cascaded, Evelyn's toast lifting her glass. To family, not by blood, but by choice. To Niaza, who showed this old fool the light. Cheers rang out, Ethan's arm around Niaza's waist, his kiss lingering on her temple. The moment a pinnacle of harmony. Later in the bedroom's hush, Niaza slipped into the turquoise silk, the fabric a lover's caress, drawing Ethan close. Their union was fervent, bodies entwining in a dance of gratitude, his hands reverent on her curves, her nails grazing his back. Climaxes crashing like gulf waves, sealing their odyssey. In the quiet aftermath, Niaza traced Ethan's jaw, her voice a whisper against his chest. We made it. He nodded, eyes shining, the cottage's walls bearing witness to their triumph. A sanctuary reclaimed, boundaries etched in love's indelible ink. Evelyn's footsteps faded down the drive, her parting wave a promise of tomorrow's visits. The night enveloped them, stars pricking the sky like affirmations. Niaza's heart full with the knowledge that from betrayal's ashes, they'd risen, not unscathed, but unbreakable, their story a testament to resilience's quiet roar. As the final echoes of Niaza's triumph fade, remember, from betrayal's thorns blooms unbreakable resilience. What hit home for you, Evelyn's awakening or love's fierce reclaiming? Share your thoughts below. Your stories fuel ours. Thanks for journeying through this tale of shadows and light. Until next time, keep guarding your peace. Stay fierce. Look at my wife, Jamal slurred from Chicago's glittering rooftop, arm around Lena, voice drowning jazz. That stupid black woman lounging at home, dreaming nonsense, leeching my success, knows nothing but spending. 50 froze. Zuri's mahogany skin burned under hazel-stung eyes, pink gown cracking like armor. Principal Hayes advanced. Jamal, who funds our school? Zuri, she's wealthy. Her Apex Innovations owns 70% EdTech stake, millions for labs, and scholarships. Your salary? Her grants. Gasps, phones lit. Jamal paled. Zuri smiled icily. Exactly, darling. I'm rich and free. What buried secrets for love? Vengeance or unbreakable empire? Her rise awaits. In the quiet hush of her home office, tucked away in the sun-dappled corner of their Chicago high-rise, Zuri's fingers danced across the keyboard like whispers on silk. The glow of dual monitors bathed her mahogany skin in a soft azure light, turning the fine sheen of her arms into something almost ethereal, as if the code she wove was pulling stars from the ether. Her hazel eyes, sharp as cut citrine, narrowed in fierce concentration, tracing lines of elegant script that promised to reshape classrooms across the city. Apex Innovations, her unspoken empire, birthed from late-night epiphanies and relentless grit, hummed beneath her touch. This latest update, a sleek app threading personalized learning paths for underserved kids, had just inked deals worth $50 million with Ivy League feeders and urban charters alike. But Zuri felt no swell of triumph, only the steady rhythm of purpose, like a heartbeat she'd long learned to muffle. She leaned back, the ergonomic chair sighing under her, and let her gaze drift to the window. Lake Michigan sprawled beyond, a vast indigo mirror under the midday sun, waves lapping at Navy Pier like secrets too vast to hold. It was moments like this, code compiling in silent victory, that Zuri clung to, the uncelebrated pulse of her world. No fanfare, no boardroom toasts, just her, the machine, and the quiet thrill of bending possibility to her will. A smile tugged at her full lips, warm and private, as the compiler chimed its approval. Another bridge built, she thought, her chest loosening with that rare, unguarded warmth. For kids like the ones she'd once been, daubed in the margins of underfunded schools, dreaming of circuits and stars, this was her rebellion, coded in compassion. But the warmth flickered when she heard the front door click open, the familiar jangle of keys hitting the bowl like a punctuation mark on her solitude. Jamal, her husband of 5 years, the man whose laughter had once unraveled her defenses like a glitch in the matrix. Zuri's heart quickened, Not with the old electric surge, but with a tender anticipation laced with something sharper now. Anticipation edged by the subtle ache of unspoken truths. She saved her work, fingers lingering on the keys as if reluctant to release the reins of her domain, then rose, smoothing her simple cotton blouse over jeans worn soft from endless nights at the desk. He appeared in the doorway, tie loosened like a flag of surrender after a long day, his short brown hair tousled from raking fingers through it. Jamal's face, pale and boyish even at 32, split into that grin, the one that had hooked her from across a crowded conference hall years ago. "Hey, beautiful," he said, voice rich with the Midwestern lilt that still sent a shiver down her spine. He crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her into an embrace that smelled of chalk dust and faint cologne, his arms wrapping around her waist with the easy possessiveness of habit. Zuri melted into it, her cheek against his shoulder, inhaling the scent that whispered home. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to this, his steady breath, her pulse syncing with his, the illusion of unbreakable harmony. As they parted, Jamal's blue eyes sparkled with that post-victory gleam. "You won't believe the day I had," he launched in, already pacing the room with animated energy, hands gesturing like a conductor summoning symphonies. "Third period, right? Little Jamal, ironic, huh? That kid who's been zoning out all semester? I hit him with this interactive history sim I rigged up on the projector. Boom. Eyes wide, questions flying. The whole class lit up like fireworks. Principal Hayes pulled me aside after, says I'm a shoo-in for that department head spot next term. 90K, baby. We're talking real stability." Zuri's smile widened, genuine and radiant, her hazel eyes crinkling at the corners. Pride bloomed in her chest, fierce and unyielding, like the first successful debug after hours of frustration. She loved this about him, the fire, the unfiltered joy in small triumphs, the way his passion for those kids mirrored her own hidden crusade. "That's incredible, Jamal," she murmured, stepping closer to cup his face, thumbs brushing the faint stubble along his jaw. His skin was warm, flushed with the rush of the wind, and for a moment she saw the man she'd fallen for. Ambitious, alive, a beacon in the dim halls of public education. "You deserve it. Those kids, they're lucky to have you lighting that spark. Tell me more. What sim? How'd you tweak it?" But Jamal waved it off with a chuckle, already turning toward the kitchen, his momentum unbroken. "Oh, just some basic branching narratives on the Civil War. Nothing too techy like your wizardry." He paused at the fridge, cracking open a beer with a hiss that cut the air too sharply. The foam bubbled over, mirroring the subtle effervescence fading in Zuri's chest. She followed him, leaning against the counter, her fingers tracing absent patterns on the cool granite. Patterns like the algorithms she'd just perfected. "Speaking of," she ventured, voice soft but laced with that quiet excitement she reserved for him, "I wrapped the equity module today. It's game-changing. Adaptive algorithms that flag bias in grading patterns, then suggest reroutes for at-risk students. Could cut dropout rates by 20% in under-resourced districts. I even mocked up a pilot for your school. Hayes could greenlight it tomorrow if..." Jamal took a long pull from the bottle, nodding absently as he scrolled his phone, the screen's glow casting shadows on his face. "Sounds solid, Z. Real brainiac stuff." His tone was light, appreciative in that offhand way, but it landed like a skipped line in her code. Jarring, incomplete. He didn't look up, didn't probe deeper into the architecture she'd slaved over, the nights she'd traded sleep for syntax errors. Zuri's throat tightened, a familiar pang twisting low in her gut. Not now, she chided herself, forcing the warmth back into her smile. This was his moment, his high. She learned to time her shares like a buffer overflow, careful, contained. Instead, she sidled up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist, chin resting on his shoulder. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, pressing a kiss to the nape of his neck, tasting salt and success. Jamal leaned back into her, his free hand covering hers, squeezing with a tenderness that eased the knot. "Couldn't do it without you, babe. Keeping the home fires burning." His words wrapped around her like a blanket, cozy and confining all at once. Zuri nodded against him, swallowing the echo of her own fire dimming. She was the architect of their life, the anonymous benefactor who'd funneled 50 grand a year into his master's tuition without a whisper of credit, who'd co-signed the sleek SUV gleaming in the garage below, who'd fronted the down payment on this Lakeview perch so he could feel like the provider, the rock. Every transfer from her Apex accounts to their joint one was a deliberate veil, a gift of ego she wrapped in love. Let him shine, she told herself 1,000 times, the mantra a shield against the growing silence around her wins. Marriage was partnership, after all, his light, her shadow, intertwined. They moved to the couch as dusk bled orange across the water, Jamal recounting the day's heroics with vivid strokes, the student's breakthrough gasp, the colleague's envious nod, the principal's pat on the back. Zuri listened, her laughter genuine, her touches lingering, fingers interlacing with his, head on his shoulder. Each story pulled at her heartstrings, a reminder of why she'd chosen this man. His unyielding belief in second chances, his voice cracking with passion over a lesson's arc. But as the tales looped back to his ascent, the raise, the title, the respect, Zuri felt the subtle shift, like a variable slipping scope. Her app, her empire, hovered unspoken, a ghost in the room. When he finally paused for breath, eyes distant with replayed glory, Zuri tilted her head, searching his profile. Jamal? Her voice was a thread, tentative yet hopeful. He turned, brow quirking. Yeah? She hesitated, the words bubbling up like overflow data. That module I mentioned. It's not just code, it's for kids like us, bridge builders in broken systems. Imagine it in your classroom. Her hazel eyes held his, pleading for the spark of curiosity she'd once ignited in him. Jamal's smile softened, but it didn't reach his eyes. He squeezed her hand, pulling her closer. You're amazing, Zuri, truly. But hey, let's celebrate mine tonight. Pizza from Gino's? My treat. He kissed her forehead, quick and affectionate, then rose to order, phone already in hand. Zuri sank back, the cushion yielding like defeat. The lake outside darkened, mirroring the quiet storm in her chest, a swirl of love tangled with loss, pride pierced by invisibility. She traced the engagement ring on her finger, its diamond catching the last light, a promise etched in facets. For him, she breathed, the ache blooming into resolve. But as Jamal's laughter echoed from the kitchen, bantering with the delivery guy, a whisper of doubt crept in. How long could she code in the shadows before the program crashed? The doorbell buzzed, shattering the moment. Jamal bounded over, swinging the door wide to reveal steaming boxes and the scent of melted cheese. Feast time, he crowed, plating slices with boyish enthusiasm. Zuri joined him at the table, forcing levity into her laugh as they clinked bottles. Under the table, her foot hooked his ankle, a silent tether, a plea for connection. He grinned, oblivious, diving into another anecdote about a star pupil. As the night deepened, Zuri savored the normalcy, the easy rhythm of their shared space. But when he pulled her to bed later, his kisses fervent and familiar, she arched into him with a desperation she couldn't name, clinging to the man who'd vowed forever by the lake's edge, under a sky stitched with possibility. In the afterglow, tangled in sheets, Jamal murmured sleepily, "Love you, Z. You're my anchor." Her heart clenched, tears pricking unbidden. Anchor, she echoed silently, staring at the ceiling's shadows. Not the architect, not the force, just the steady weight holding him afloat. She turned to him, tracing his sleeping face, the love still fierce but fraying at the edges. Tomorrow she'd dive back into code, building bridges no one saw. For now, in the velvet dark, Zuri held the ache close, a fragile ember she refused to let die. Zuri woke to the first blush of dawn filtering through the blinds, casting slatted gold across the rumpled sheets. Jamal's side was empty, the pillow dented but cooling, his absence a quiet void that echoed louder than any alarm. She stretched, muscles protesting the night's tangled fervor, and reached for her phone on the nightstand, a ritual as ingrained as breathing. Notifications flickered. A congratulatory email from her lead developer on the equity module's beta success, A donor alert confirming another wire transfer to Apex's scholarship fund. Triumphs stacked like unopened gifts, each one a spark she hoarded in the dark corners of her mind. Downstairs, the clatter of cabinets pulled her from bed. She padded barefoot across the hardwood, the cool floor grounding her wandering thoughts, and found Jamal in the kitchen, humming off-key to some classic rock tune on the radio. His back was to her, broad shoulders flexing under a faded college tee as he poured coffee, steam curling like unspoken questions. Zuri paused in the doorway, heart swelling with that familiar cocktail of affection and fragility. Love, yes, but laced with the subtle erosion of self she'd begun to sense, like code compiling with hidden bugs. "Morning, handsome," she murmured, slipping behind him to wrap her arms around his waist, chin hooking over his shoulder. His scent, soap and sleep, enveloped her, a balm against the night's residue. Jamal turned his head, planting a quick kiss on her temple, his stubble grazing her skin like a promise half kept. "Morning, Z. Slept like the dead after that pizza coma." He chuckled, handing her a mug, the ceramic warm against her palms. Black, 2 sugars, just how she liked it. A small victory in the choreography of their mornings. They settled at the island, knees brushing under the quartz, and for a moment the world felt stitched back together. Zuri sipped, the bitterness grounding her, and watched him scroll through his lesson planner, brow furrowed in that endearing concentration she adored. As the sun climbed, spilling light across the lake view, Jamal's energy ignited again. "So, Hayes cornered me yesterday, wants me leading that new curriculum rollout for the district. Me, Zuri, front and center." His eyes lit with that boyish fire, hands animating the air as he described the pitch. Interactive modules on social justice, gamified debates that could revolutionize how these kids see themselves. Pride surged in Zuri's chest, hot and unfiltered. She saw the ripple effect, the way his passion could echo her own coded bridges, amplifying voices long silenced. "That's huge," she breathed, leaning forward, her hazel eyes locking on his with genuine fervor. "You're changing lives in there, Jamal. Not just teaching facts, igniting them. What if we synced it with my app? The adaptive paths could tailor those modules per student, flag cultural blind spots before they hit." Her voice quickened, words tumbling like lines of eager script, envisioning the fusion. His classroom alchemy meeting her digital forge, a hybrid potent enough to rewrite futures. Jamal's nod was quick, almost mechanical, as he drained his mug. "Yeah, cool idea. But let's keep it simple. I've got enough on my plate without layering in tech bells and whistles." He rose, rinsing his cup with a clatter that jarred the air, his back to her again. Zuri's smile faltered, the enthusiasm curdling into a quiet sting, like a variable undefined. She stared at the steam rising from her coffee, swirling patterns that mocked her unraveling poise. "Simple," she echoed inwardly, the word lodging like grit in her throat. Her bells and whistles had bankrolled his masters, patted their nest egg until it brimmed. Yet here she was, pitching collaboration like a supplicant at her own table. She swallowed the retort, forcing levity as she joined him at the sink. "Fair enough, you're the maestro." Her hand grazed his arm, seeking reconnection, and he turned, pulling her into a loose hug, his laugh rumbling against her ear. "Damn right. And you're my muse, holding down the fort while I conquer the world." The words landed soft, affectionate, but they twisted in her gut, a velvet noose tightening. Fort, not empire, not the labyrinth of servers humming in hidden data centers, nor the board she'd quietly assembled from Silicon Valley shadows. Just the hearth she'd stoked with invisible fuel. The day unfolded in its familiar cadence. Jamal off to school with a lingering kiss and a love you, the door clicking shut like a period on their interlude. Zuri retreated to her office, the monitors welcoming her back with open arms. Hours blurred into a frenzy of refinement, tweaking algorithms until they sang, fielding encrypted calls from partners who treated her like the oracle she was. Each breakthrough sent a thrill racing through her veins, electric and alive, her laughter echoing off the walls in solitary celebration. But as afternoon waned, the high ebbed, replaced by that creeping hollowness. She fired off a text to Jamal. Nailed the pilot demo. Thoughts? Minutes ticked by. Then his reply. Awesome. Busy WeWAS parent conf. Home late. Zozuri set the phone down, the screen's glow fading like her spark. She wandered to the living room, sinking into the couch with a glass of red, the wine's tart bite mirroring her mood. The apartment, their sanctuary, bought with her first big exit payout, felt vast and echoing, walls adorned with his framed teaching awards, photos of their lakefront vows where her smile hid the weight of what she'd surrendered. She traced the edge of a frame, finger lingering on their intertwined hands, the memory surfacing unbidden. That conference 6 years back, Jamal's awestruck gaze across the hall as she demoed her prototype. You're a revolution, he'd whispered later, over cheap wine and stolen glances, building worlds no one's even dreamed. Back then, he'd devoured her stories, eyes wide as she unpacked neural nets and equity metrics, his questions a lifeline pulling her from isolation. Now, the shift had crept in like fog off the lake. Subtle at first after his promotion, the raise had inflated him, his tales dominating dinners, her contributions, footnotes dismissed with a pat. That's my girl. Last week's dinner with his buddies replayed in her mind, uninvited and sharp. The guys, pale faces flushed with beer, slapping Jamal's back over his big break,